Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Jennifer Williams, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the spring of 2024, during what was supposed to be a rejuvenating weekend in Delaware's wilderness. The anxiety medication was still new to me. Dr. Mercer had prescribed it after my panic attacks started getting worse, especially after my divorce from Eric. Just something to take the edge off, he'd said with that practiced smile doctors perfect in medical school. But the tiny white pills made my thoughts fuzzy, and I wasn't sure if that was better or worse than the sharp edges of panic they were supposed to soften. I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror of my Georgetown apartment, my blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, dark circles still visible under my eyes despite my attempts at concealer. My friend Melissa Scott had suggested this trip for months. "You need to reconnect with yourself, Jen," she'd say between sips of overpriced wine at our weekly meetups. "Remember how you used to love hiking before everything?" By everything, she meant the divorce, the anxiety diagnosis, and the general unraveling of the life I'd carefully constructed over the past decade. A weekend in Blackbird State Forest seemed like a reasonable first step toward reclaiming some part of myself that had been lost in the shuffle. Melissa was waiting in her Honda Civic when I came down, my new backpack stuffed with probably too many essentials for a 2-night camping trip. Her face lit up when she saw me, and I felt a pang of gratitude for her persistent friendship through my darkest months. "There she is," Melissa exclaimed, her curly brown hair bouncing as she jumped out to help with my gear. "Delaware's natural splendor awaits." Her enthusiasm was infectious, if exhausting. Melissa had always been the more adventurous one between us, dragging me to salsa classes and pottery workshops over the years. This camping trip was just another in her long line of experiences she believed would enrich our lives. The drive from DC to Delaware took just under 2 hours. As Melissa chatted about her latest dating disaster with some lawyer named Brad, I watched the urban landscape gradually give way to rolling countryside and eventually the denser trees that signaled our approach to Blackbird State Forest. "Did you know this place has some pretty wild history?" Melissa asked, turning down the radio. "I was reading about it last night." I raised an eyebrow. "Wild how?" "Well, there's the usual colonial stuff, settlements, land disputes, but some locals believe parts of the forest are haunted. There's this story about a woman who went missing in the 1890s. Elizabeth Crew was her name. She was accused of witchcraft by the locals." I rolled my eyes. "In the 1890s? That's a bit late for witch trials, Mel." "Not official ones, obviously," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "More like the townsfolk believed she was practicing and shunned her. Story goes, she fled into the forest and was never seen again. Some hikers claim they've heard a woman crying or singing deep in the woods, especially around the old mill ruins." "Sounds like standard campfire fare to me," I said, though something about the story made me uneasy. Maybe it was the casual cruelty of it. A woman driven from her home by superstition and fear. "There's a trail that passes near where her cabin supposedly stood," Melissa continued, either missing or ignoring my discomfort. "The Tuskegee Trail. That's where we're headed." The forest ranger at the entrance station was a weathered man in his 50s named Frank Daniels, according to his name tag. He regarded us with friendly suspicion as he handed over a map. "You ladies camping at Site 17, right? It's a good one, close to the creek, but not too close." His eyes lingered on me a moment too long. "You been out here before?" Melissa answered before I could. "I have, but it's Jennifer's first time at Blackbird." Frank nodded slowly. "Well, stick to the marked trails. We've had some issues lately with people getting turned around. Cell service is spotty at best, so don't count on your phones. And," he hesitated, "might want to be back at your campsite before dark. The trails can get confusing after sunset." "We'll be careful," I assured him, anxious to move on from his scrutiny. As we drove deeper into the forest to our designated campsite, the canopy thickened overhead, dappling the road with shifting shadows. Our campsite was as Ranger Frank had described, a cleared area with a fire pit, picnic table, and enough flat ground for our tent. The Beaver Branch stream burbled somewhere close by, just visible through the trees about 30 yards from our site. Setting up camp took longer than expected. While Melissa had done this before, my inexperience showed as I struggled with tent poles and tried to remember the proper way to secure the rainfly. By the time we finished, the afternoon sun was already beginning its descent. "We should head out for a short hike before it gets too late," Melissa suggested, consulting the map. "The Tuskegee Trail isn't far. We can do part of it today and save the rest for tomorrow." Still feeling the effects of the anxiety medication, I hesitated. "Are you sure?" Ranger Frank seemed pretty clear about getting back before dark. "We're not going far," she assured me. "Just enough to stretch our legs after the drive. Trust me, the forest is gorgeous in the late afternoon light." I relented, partly because I didn't want to disappoint her, and partly because the purpose of this trip was to push myself out of my comfort zone, at least incrementally. The trail started innocuously enough. A well-maintained path wound through stands of loblolly pine, sweet gum, and oak trees. Melissa pointed out various plants and birds with surprising knowledge, while I trailed slightly behind, taking photos with my phone and trying to quiet the persistent unease that had settled in my stomach since our arrival. About 40 minutes in, we reached a wooden footbridge spanning a narrow section of Beaver Branch. The water below ran clear and cold over smooth stones. Melissa paused mid-bridge, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. "Smell that? Pure oxygen. No car exhaust, no restaurant grease, just nature." I had to admit, the forest scent was intoxicating, a complex mixture of pine, damp earth, and something sweetly floral I couldn't identify. For the first time since arriving, I felt some of my tension ease. That's when I heard it. A soft, melodic sound carried on the breeze. At first I thought it might be another hiker's music playing from a distance, but as I listened more carefully, I realized it was a woman's voice, singing words I couldn't quite make out. "Do you hear that?" I asked Melissa, who was still in her meditative pose. She opened her eyes. "Hear what?" "That singing. Someone singing." Melissa listened for a moment, then shook her head. "I don't hear anything except the stream and some birds." The singing faded as suddenly as it had appeared, making me question whether I'd heard it at all. Maybe it was a side effect of the medication, or my mind playing tricks after Melissa's story about Elizabeth Crew. "It's nothing," I said quickly. "Must have been the wind." Melissa gave me an appraising look but didn't press the issue. "Let's go a bit further. There's supposed to be an overlook about half a mile ahead." The trail became steeper and narrower as we continued. The dense forest seemed to close in around us with fewer gaps between trees and thicker undergrowth. I checked my phone. No service, as Ranger Frank had warned. The time showed 5:48 p.m. "Mel, we should probably start heading back soon," I called ahead to her. "It'll be getting dark in another hour or so." "The overlook should be just around this bend," she called back. 5 more minutes, I promise." I sighed and followed her around the curve in the trail. The path suddenly opened to a clearing at the edge of a small cliff. Below us stretched a panoramic view of the forest canopy, with patches of marshland visible in the distance. The setting sun cast everything in a golden glow that was undeniably beautiful. Melissa spread her arms wide. "Worth it, right?" I had to agree. Something about the vista made me feel small in the best possible way, my problems diminishing in the face of something so vast and enduring. I took several photos, though I knew they wouldn't capture the feeling of standing there. As I lowered my phone, my eye caught movement at the forest edge about 50 yards to our right. A figure stood partially obscured by trees, a woman in what appeared to be a long, dark dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Mel," I whispered, nudging her without taking my eyes off the woman. "Someone's there." Melissa followed my gaze. Where? I don't see anyone. Right there, by that cluster of pines. A woman in a dark dress. But even as I pointed, the figure stepped backward and seemed to melt into the shadow of the trees, disappearing from view. Are you feeling okay? Melissa asked, concern etching her features. Maybe the altitude or the medication. I'm not hallucinating, I snapped, more harshly than intended. There was someone there. Okay, she said soothingly. Maybe it was another hiker. Anyway, you're right about the time. We should head back. The return journey felt longer than the hike out. The forest, which had seemed merely atmospheric before, now felt watchful. Shadows stretched longer across the trail, and normal woodland sounds, the rustle of leaves, the occasional snap of a twig, seemed amplified in the growing dusk. We had just crossed back over the footbridge when Melissa stopped abruptly, causing me to bump into her. "What's wrong?" I asked. She frowned at the trail ahead. "That's weird. I don't remember passing this big fallen tree on the way in." Sure enough, a massive oak lay across the path about 20 feet ahead, its extensive root system torn from the ground and reaching skyward like grasping fingers. "Maybe we took a wrong turn after the bridge," I suggested, anxiety beginning to bubble up. Melissa consulted the map, then checked her compass. "No, this is definitely the right trail. This tree must have fallen very recently." We approached the obstacle cautiously. The tree was at least 4 feet in diameter, its bark still intact and leaves still green. There were no signs of sawdust or cutting tools, no indication that park rangers had been working on clearing it. "We'll have to climb over," Melissa decided, already approaching the trunk. As I followed her example, hoisting myself onto the rough bark, a powerful scent hit me. Sweet, floral, and overwhelming. The same unidentifiable scent I'd caught traces of earlier, but now so strong it was almost nauseating. And underneath it, something else. Something putrid and wrong. "Do you smell that?" I gasped, nearly losing my balance on the tree trunk. Melissa paused, halfway over. "Smell what?" "That sickly sweet smell? Like flowers, but too strong. And something rotting." She inhaled deeply, then shrugged. "Just smells like wood and dirt to me. Come on, we need to hurry." I made it over the trunk, trying to breathe through my mouth. The smell dissipated as we continued down the trail, but my unease remained. The forest had definitely grown darker, with the sun now below the tree line. Shadows pooled in the spaces between trees, making depth perception difficult. "Mel, I think we're on the wrong trail," I said after another 15 minutes of walking. Nothing looked familiar, and the path had narrowed considerably. "We have to be on the right one," she insisted, though I could hear uncertainty in her voice. We followed it straight back from the bridge. "Then where's the trailhead? We should have reached it by now." She stopped walking and pulled out her phone. "No signal, of course?" She checked the map again, turning it to match our direction of travel. "According to this, we should be... Wait. What? This doesn't make sense. According to the compass, we've been heading northeast, but we need to go northwest to get back to the campsite." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. "How is that possible? We haven't made any turns." Melissa's confident facade finally cracked. "I don't know, Jen. It doesn't make sense." As if on cue, the first notes of a distant melody floated through the trees. The same ethereal singing I'd heard earlier, but clearer now. A woman's voice, soft and melodic, singing words that still remained just beyond comprehension. This time, Melissa heard it too. Her eyes widened. "Okay, that's probably another camper, right?" I nodded, not believing it for a second. "Probably." "Hello?" Melissa called out, her voice echoing among the trees. "Is someone there? We could use some help." The singing stopped abruptly. The forest fell into an unnatural silence. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of wind in the leaves. Let's just keep moving, I whispered, suddenly afraid that we'd drawn attention to ourselves. Which way? Melissa pointed to our left. Northwest should be that way. We'll have to go off trail, but if we keep checking the compass, we should hit the main road eventually. Leaving the trail went against everything I'd ever heard about wilderness safety, but staying put as darkness fell seemed even worse. We set off through the underbrush, Melissa in the lead with her compass, me close behind. The forest floor was uneven and treacherous in the fading light. Roots threatened to trip us. Low branches scratched at our faces and arms, and the undergrowth grew thicker with every step. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, we paused to catch our breath. "Let me check the compass again," Melissa said, her voice tight with strain. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, illuminating her face in harsh white light. She looked pale and drawn, strands of hair escaping from her once neat ponytail. She stared at the compass in confusion. "That can't be right," she muttered. "What is it?" "According to this, we're now heading southeast, but that's impossible. We've been walking in a straight line." My flashlight beam wavered as my hand began to shake. "This isn't normal, Mel." "No," she agreed quietly. "It's not." The singing started again, louder this time and seemingly from multiple directions at once. The sweet, cloying scent returned, carried on a breeze that shouldn't have been able to penetrate the dense forest around us. "We need to find shelter," I said, forcing myself to think logically through the rising panic. "It's too dark to keep going. We could get seriously hurt." Melissa nodded, her previous confidence completely evaporated. "You're right. Let's look for somewhere to wait until morning." My flashlight beam caught something through the trees, a darker shape against the darkness. "There's something over there," I said, pointing. We approached cautiously to find a small structure nestled among the trees, a cabin or shed of some sort. It was old, with weathered wooden walls and a sloped roof. No light came from its single visible window. "Hello," Melissa called as we approached. "Is anyone here?" Only silence answered. I directed my flashlight through the window, revealing a simple one-room interior. Dust covered the few pieces of furniture, a small table, a chair, what looked like a bed frame against one wall. The place appeared long abandoned. "We can't stay here," I whispered, though I wasn't sure why I was keeping my voice down. "This is someone's property." "No one's been here in years, Jen," Melissa reasoned, "and we don't have much choice. We need shelter, and this is shelter." The door wasn't locked, just stuck from disuse. It groaned open after Melissa put her shoulder into it, releasing a cloud of dust that made us both cough. The interior smelled of mold and decay, but also faintly of that same sweet floral scent that had been following us. "Let me see if I can find a lantern or something," Melissa said, moving deeper into the cabin. I remained by the door, suddenly reluctant to fully commit to entering this strange place. My flashlight beam played across the walls, revealing yellowed wallpaper peeling in strips. There were markings on the exposed wood beneath, symbols or writing I couldn't make out. "Mel, there's something on the walls," I called. She had moved to a small sideboard and was rummaging through drawers. "Found some candles," she announced triumphantly, holding up several stubby white cylinders. As she lit the first candle with her cigarette lighter, I stepped further into the cabin, drawn to the strange markings. In the better light, I could now see they were crude carvings, symbols that looked like a cross between letters and pictographs, covering nearly every inch of exposed wood. "What is this place?" I murmured. Melissa placed candles around the room, the warm light creating more shadows than illumination. Some old hunter's cabin, probably. Been here for decades by the look of it. But something told me it wasn't that simple. The cabin felt intentional, purposeful in its isolation. As I examined the symbols more closely, I noticed they formed patterns, concentric circles and spirals that seemed to radiate out from a central point on the back wall. Melissa had moved to what appeared to be a trunk at the foot of the bed frame. "Maybe there are some blankets in here," she said, lifting the heavy lid. "Mel, I don't think we should touch anything," I warned, but it was too late. The lid creaked open, and Melissa leaned forward to peer inside. She gasped and stumbled backward, dropping the lid with a bang that shook the entire cabin. "What? What is it?" I rushed to her side. She was shaking, her face drained of color. There's something in there." Steeling myself, I approached the trunk and slowly raised the lid. The candle's light fell on the contents, a collection of objects arranged with obvious care. A bundle of dried herbs tied with string, several small animal bones, bleached white, a knife with an ornately carved handle, a leather-bound book, its cover stained dark, and nestled among these objects, a cloth doll with button eyes and stitched mouth, wearing a dress made from the same material as the curtains still hanging in the cabin's window. The doll's face was distorted, its features twisted as if in pain or rage. Crude stitches marred its cloth skin, red thread against the pale fabric. It reminded me of a voodoo doll from horror movies, but more personal, more specific in its malice. "We need to leave," Melissa said, her voice barely audible. "Right now." I let the trunk lid fall closed, agreeing completely. But as I turned toward the door, I noticed something we'd both missed in our initial survey of the cabin: a photograph in a simple frame, hanging crooked on the wall beside the door. The glass was cloudy with age and grime, but the image was still discernible: a woman in a dark dress standing in front of this very cabin. Her hair hung loose around a solemn face, her eyes staring directly into the camera with an intensity that made my skin crawl. It was her, the woman I'd seen at the Overlook. A sudden gust of wind hit the cabin, so strong it made the walls creak and the candle flames dance wildly. The singing started again, no longer distant but seemingly right outside the door, the words finally clear enough to understand. "Come to me, lost ones. Come to me, wanderers. The forest claims what is freely given." The voice was hypnotic, pulling at something deep inside me. I took an involuntary step toward the door before Melissa grabbed my arm. "Don't," she whispered urgently. "Don't listen to it." The singing grew louder, accompanied now by scratching sounds at the windows and walls, like branches dragged across wood, or fingernails seeking entrance. The bargain remains: a life for a life. The forest remembers Elizabeth Crew. Elizabeth Crew, the name from Melissa's story, the alleged witch who'd disappeared into these woods over a century ago. This had to be her cabin, her things in the trunk, her voice outside our door. The scratching intensified, focusing on the door itself. The wooden planks bulged inward as if under enormous pressure. Dust and splinters showered down from the ceiling as the entire structure groaned. "The windows," I gasped, pulling Melissa toward the back of the cabin. "We can get out through the windows." But as we reached the single rear window, a face pressed against the glass. Or something like a face. In the dim light, I could make out only pale skin stretched too tight over sharp features, eyes that reflected the candlelight like an animal's, and a mouth open too wide in what might have been a smile or a snarl. Melissa screamed, the sound jolting me out of my frozen horror. I grabbed her hand and pulled her back toward the center of the room. "The symbols," I said suddenly, remembering the carvings. "They're protections. Wards." "What are you talking about?" Melissa cried. "The carvings on the walls, they're not Elizabeth's. They're against her. Someone tried to protect this place." The pressure on the door increased, the wood splintering at the edges. The candles flickered violently, then extinguished all at once, plunging us into darkness broken only by the beam of my flashlight. In that moment of darkness, I remembered the contents of the trunk, the knife, the book. Acting on instinct, I flung open the lid and grabbed both items, the knife's handle cold and heavy in my palm. "What are you doing?" Melissa demanded, her voice shrill with terror. "I don't know," I admitted, flipping frantically through the book with my flashlight wedged under my arm. The pages were filled with the same symbols carved into the walls, accompanied by text in an archaic hand. The door gave way with a thunderous crack. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw not a woman but a twisted approximation of one, limbs too long and jointed in the wrong places, that too wide mouth filled with needle-like teeth, eyes that burned with an inner light in a face both ancient and impossibly preserved. Melissa's scream cut off abruptly as the thing seized her with elongated fingers, lifting her as easily as a child might lift a doll. I watched in horror as my friend's body went rigid, her eyes rolling back to show only whites. A life for a life. The thing that had been Elizabeth Crew rasped, its voice both the melodic singing from before and something older, deeper, hungrier. The forest claims what is freely given. "I didn't give you anything," I shouted, backing away until I hit the wall. The creature tilted its head at an impossible angle. "Not you, her." It looked at Melissa's limp form. "She brought you here. An offering. A replacement." Understanding crashed over me like ice water. The trail that didn't lead back to camp. The fallen tree that hadn't been there before. The cabin that appeared when we needed shelter. "That's not possible," I whispered. "Melissa wouldn't." "The desperate make desperate bargains," the creature said, almost gently. "Her mother before her, her grandmother before that. The women of her blood have fed the forest for generations." Melissa's eyes fluttered open, meeting mine with an expression of anguish and resignation. "I'm sorry, Jen," she whispered. "They said it would just be one night, that you'd be returned, that the forest only wanted to taste your fear." "You knew," I gasped, betrayal cutting deeper than any fear. "You brought me here on purpose?" A tear slid down her cheek. "My mother is dying of cancer. They promised a cure if I brought a replacement. Just for one night. I didn't know. I didn't know it would be like this." The creature's grip on Melissa tightened, causing her to cry out in pain. "The bargain is broken," it hissed. "The offering was insincere. The forest will have both." In that moment of terrible clarity, I realized I was still holding the knife and book from the trunk. The book had fallen open to a page with a symbol larger than the others, a spiral with a line struck through it. The same symbol was carved above the cabin door, I now remembered. Acting on pure instinct, I lunged forward and slashed the knife across my palm. Blood welled immediately, hot and shocking in the cold terror of the moment. "Blood, freely given," I said, the words coming from somewhere beyond conscious thought. I pressed my bleeding hand to the symbol in the book. "Not taken. A bargain of my own." The creature hissed, a sound like steam escaping a pressure valve. It dropped Melissa, who crumpled to the floor, and focused its burning gaze on me. "You know not what you offer, child of iron and asphalt," it said, its voice multiplying into many voices, echoing from every corner of the cabin. "I offer passage," I continued, the words flowing through me as if I were merely a channel for something older than myself. "Safe passage for us both, and blood freely given in exchange." The air in the cabin grew thick, charged like the moment before lightning strikes. The symbols on the walls began to glow faintly, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. The creature moved toward me with that unnatural jointed gait, its face shifting between the woman in the photograph and something else, something that had never been human at all. "The bargain is struck," it said, reaching for my bleeding hand. "But the forest never forgets a debt." Its fingers touched mine, cold as grave dirt and burning like acid. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, shooting up my arm and through my entire body. The cabin dissolved around us, the walls giving way to swirling darkness punctuated by points of light like distant stars. I was falling, or flying, or both at once. Melissa's scream echoed somewhere far away, then cut off as suddenly as it had begun. The darkness pressed in from all sides, suffocating in its completeness. Then, just as suddenly, it was dawn. I lay on cold, damp ground, pine needles pressed against my cheek. My body ached as if I'd been running for miles, and my hand throbbed where I'd cut it, though when I examined it, I found not a fresh wound but a thin white scar, fully healed as if years had passed. I sat up slowly, taking in my surroundings. I was at our campsite. Our tent stood undisturbed, the fire pit cold and unused. Melissa lay a few feet away, still unconscious but breathing steadily. My phone was in my pocket, undamaged. The screen showed 6:37 a.m. and full battery, as if we'd never left. A notification showed full signal. Impossible this deep in the forest, according to Ranger Frank. When Melissa finally stirred, her eyes held a haunted vacancy that mirrored what I felt inside. Neither of us spoke as we packed up camp with mechanical efficiency. We left no note, offered no explanation at the ranger station. Frank Daniels wasn't there anyway, just a young woman who barely looked up from her phone as we dropped off our parking permit. The drive home was conducted in complete silence. Melissa dropped me at my apartment with just 4 words. "I'm so sorry, Jen." I never spoke to her again after that day. I heard through mutual friends that her mother made a miraculous recovery. The cancer simply gone between one checkup and the next, to the astonishment of her doctors. As for me, I dream of the forest every night, of singing in the trees and symbols carved in wood, of a bargain made and a debt still owed. The scar on my palm tingles when I get too close to parks or wooded areas. Sometimes, standing at my apartment window at night, I catch a whiff of that sweet, floral scent, gone before I can truly register it. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I hear singing. A woman's voice, melodic and enticing, promising answers if only I would return to Blackbird State Forest. I know I will someday. The forest never forgets a debt. But not yet. Not today. For now, I keep the curtains drawn and the doors locked. I've thrown away the anxiety medication. I need my thoughts clear, my senses sharp. I've filled my apartment with plants, not as penance but as warning systems. They react to things I cannot see, leaves trembling when no breeze stirs the air. The dreams are getting more frequent, more detailed. In them, I walk back into those woods willingly, following the singing to its source. I find the cabin again, but this time it's waiting for me, welcoming. In the dreams, I understand the symbols on the walls. I know their purpose and power. I wake from these dreams with words in my mouth I don't remember learning, my hand outstretched toward a presence I can almost see in the corner of my bedroom. A woman in a dark dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, watching me with patient, hungry eyes. Waiting. The forest is patient. It has all the time in the world. And so do I, until the debt comes due. My name is Michelle Young, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Tuckahoe State Park in Delaware just last fall. I never wanted to go camping alone, but after what happened with Eric, I needed to prove something to myself. 3 years of letting someone else make all the decisions for me had left me feeling hollow, a shadow of the independent woman I used to be. So when our relationship ended, when I found those messages on his phone, I decided it was time to reclaim parts of myself I'd surrendered. Tuckahoe wasn't my first choice. Growing up in Dover, I'd heard stories about those woods. Nothing concrete, just the kind of local whispers that make parents call their children home before dusk. But the park was only a 40-minute drive from my apartment, and the trail system was supposedly manageable for beginners. Perfect for someone like me who hadn't done much hiking since college. I arrived on a Friday afternoon in late October. The ranger at the entrance booth, a weathered man in his 60s with skin like tanned leather, frowned when I told him I was camping alone. "Not many solo hikers this time of year," he said, handing me a map. His eyes lingered on my face a beat too long. "You planning on staying on the marked trails?" "That's the plan," I assured him, forcing a confident smile. "Just need a couple of days of fresh air." He nodded slowly. "Well, make sure you do. We've had some folks get turned around out there recently. Cell service is spotty at best, especially around the eastern ridge. I'll be careful, I promised, accepting the permit he pushed through the window. As I drove toward the designated parking area, I noticed how quickly the trees thickened around the narrow gravel road. The autumn foliage was just past peak, deep crimson and burnt orange giving way to skeletal branches that clawed at a pewter sky. The beauty I'd expected was there, but something else too, a heaviness that pressed against my car windows. I'd planned to hike 3 miles to a primitive campsite along Tuckahoe Creek. The trail was clearly marked with blue blazes, an easy path that followed the water for most of the way. According to the map, I'd pass one other designated campsite before reaching my own, but the ranger had mentioned they weren't expecting other campers until Saturday. The parking lot was empty except for a mud-splattered pickup truck parked at the far end. As I shouldered my backpack and adjusted the straps, I felt a flicker of uncertainty. Maybe this wasn't the grand gesture of independence I'd imagined. Maybe it was just foolish. But I'd already paid for the permit, already told my sister and best friend where I'd be. Pride pushed me forward onto the trailhead. The first mile was exactly what I'd hoped for. The path hugged the creek, occasionally opening into small clearings where sunlight dappled the forest floor. The sound of running water and rustling leaves quieted the constant chatter in my head. The second-guessing, the rehashing of arguments, the endless loop of discovering those messages. I took deep breaths of pine-scented air and felt something inside me begin to uncoil. That's when I heard the whistle. It was faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the wind, a 3-note pattern that seemed to come from somewhere ahead on the trail. I paused, listening. When it came again, it sounded more deliberate, too rhythmic to be natural. Someone else was out here. I wasn't alarmed, not yet. Other hikers weren't unusual, even if the ranger hadn't expected any. I continued walking, keeping my pace steady. The path narrowed as it pulled away from the creek, climbing a gentle slope through a stand of tall pines. The forest grew darker here, the canopy blocking what little afternoon sunlight remained. The whistling stopped. I rounded a bend and caught movement up ahead, a figure crossing the trail about 50 yards away. From that distance, all I could make out was the shape of someone in dark clothing slipping between the trees. They moved too quickly for me to call out, disappearing into the underbrush to my right. My steps slowed. I considered the pickup truck in the parking lot. Probably just another hiker, I told myself, though something about the way they'd moved, furtively as if trying not to be seen, left me uneasy. I glanced at my phone. No service, just as the ranger had warned. I squared my shoulders and continued walking, more alert now, scanning the forest on either side of the trail. The weight of my pack suddenly felt reassuring. I'd packed smart, bringing everything I needed to be self-sufficient, including the small canister of bear spray in my jacket pocket. The first designated campsite appeared empty when I passed it an hour later. A simple clearing with a stone fire ring and a crude wooden bench. I checked the map again, confirming I had another mile to go to reach my site. The afternoon was fading fast, the low clouds threatening an early twilight. I needed to set up camp before dark. I just folded the map when I heard it again, the same 3-note whistle, closer this time, off to my left. I froze, straining to locate its source. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin in the dense woods. No response, only the whisper of wind through pine needles. I picked up my pace, suddenly eager to reach my campsite. The trail began to descend again toward the creek, and the trees thinned enough to let in what little daylight remained. My site should be just ahead, in a small clearing beside a bend in the water. When I arrived 10 minutes later, I immediately noticed something was wrong. The fire pit, which should have been empty and ready for new campers, contained the charred remains of a recent fire. Around it, the ground was littered with evidence of visitors: an empty beer can, a granola bar wrapper, a crumpled tissue. Someone had been here, perhaps recently. I hesitated at the edge of the clearing, suddenly reluctant to claim the space. But the alternatives weren't appealing. Hiking back toward the parking lot as darkness fell or pushing on to the next site which was another 2 miles ahead. I set down my pack and approached the fire pit cautiously. The ashes were cold, at least a day old. As I bent to examine them, something caught my eye, a small object half buried at the edge of the pit. I reached down and pulled it free from the dirt. It was a necklace. A simple leather cord threaded through what looked like a small animal tooth, the kind of touristy trinket you might buy at a gift shop. But something about it made the hairs on my arms stand up. I dropped it back where I'd found it and wiped my palm against my jeans. I needed to make camp. I'd brought a small one-person tent, a sleeping bag rated for temperatures down to 30 degrees, a portable stove, and enough food for 3 days. I'd practiced setting up the tent in my living room, so despite my growing unease, I worked efficiently. As the last light drained from the sky, I had my site established, tent secure, sleeping bag unrolled inside, camp stove ready beside the fire pit. I decided against a fire. Something about the silent forest made me reluctant to announce my presence any more than necessary. Instead, I used the camp stove to heat a pouch of dehydrated beef stew, eating it straight from the package as darkness settled completely around me. That's when I first noticed the smell. It was subtle at first, an organic, marshy odor that I attributed to the nearby creek. But as the night deepened, it intensified. Not the clean scent of water and mud, but something fetid and wrong, like meat left too long in summer heat. I zipped myself into the tent early, around 8 o'clock, using my headlamp to read a paperback I'd brought along. Outside, the forest had gone preternaturally silent. No owls, no rustling of nocturnal creatures. Just a heavy stillness broken occasionally by the sound of the creek. I must have dozed off while reading because I woke suddenly, disoriented, my headlamp still burning against the pages of my fallen book. The silence outside had been replaced by something else, a soft, rhythmic sound. For a confused moment, I thought it was rain pattering against the tent fly, but it was too irregular, too deliberate. Footsteps, moving around my tent. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing. The steps were light, almost cautious, circling from the creekside toward the trail. Then they stopped, directly in front of the tent's entrance. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached slowly for my phone, though I knew it would show no service. The screen cast a blue glow inside the tent as I navigated to the emergency call function. Even without service, a 911 call might go through. Outside, something brushed against the tent fabric, a deliberate touch that traced along the side toward where I lay frozen. I bit my lip to keep from making a sound. Then came the whistle. The same 3 notes, so close now I could feel them vibrate through the thin nylon. "Who's there?" I finally managed. My voice a hoarse whisper. The touching stopped. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, so quietly I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Michelle. My name. Spoken by a voice I didn't recognize, raspy and thin, neither clearly male nor female. "Who are you?" I demanded, louder now, fear crystallizing into anger. "What do you want?" No answer, but the footsteps resumed, retreating now, fading into the forest. I clutched my phone, finger hovering over the emergency call button, listening until I could no longer hear anything but the distant gurgle of the creek. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat upright in my sleeping bag, the bear spray in one hand, my small camping knife open beside me, jumping at every sound, real or imagined, until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the tent walls. Morning brought no comfort. When I finally unzipped the tent and crawled out on stiff limbs, I found my campsite exactly as I'd left it, except for one detail. The necklace I discovered and discarded the evening before now hung from a low branch directly across from my tent, the small tooth gleaming dully in the early light. Someone had been here while I cowered inside, someone who knew my name. My hands shook as I broke camp, stuffing gear haphazardly into my backpack. Last night's brave declaration of independence now seemed laughably naive. I wanted nothing more than to be back in my apartment with its deadbolts and neighbors and reliable cell service. As I shouldered my pack, I glanced once more at the dangling necklace. Something about it tugged at my memory. Some half-forgotten local story heard in childhood. I approached it cautiously and noticed what I'd missed the night before. Crude symbols etched into the yellowed surface of the tooth. Not a tourist trinket after all. I left it hanging there and set off down the trail toward the parking lot, moving as quickly as I dared on the uneven ground. The 3-mile hike that had seemed pleasant the day before now felt interminable. Every shadow between the trees concealed potential threats. Every rustle in the underbrush sent spikes of adrenaline through my system. About a mile into my retreat, the trail crossed a wooden footbridge over a narrow section of the creek. As I stepped onto the weathered planks, I noticed something in the water below, a flash of color that didn't belong among the browns and grays of the stream bed. I hesitated, then moved to the railing for a better look. Half submerged in the shallow water was a backpack, not unlike my own, its bright blue material snagged on rocks. Something about it pulled at me, a compulsion I couldn't explain. I set down my pack and scrambled down the short embankment to the water's edge. Using a fallen branch, I managed to hook the strap of the sunken pack and drag it to the bank. It was heavier than I expected, waterlogged and mud-streaked. I should have left it there, should have continued my retreat to safety. But some force stronger than common sense made me unfasten the sodden buckles. Inside was a jumble of typical camping gear: a sodden sleeping bag, a small stuff sack, a water bottle. But underneath it all was a plastic bag containing something that stopped my breath: a driver's license belonging to Melissa Scott, 27, from Wilmington. The photo showed a smiling woman with auburn hair and freckles across the bridge of her nose. Next to the license was a small notebook, its pages warped but still legible. I flipped it open to find journal entries, the last dated 2 weeks earlier. Octuine, 8. Made it to Tuckahoe late afternoon. Campsite 3 along the creek. Gorgeous fall colors, but hardly anyone around. Perfect. Later, someone whistling nearby. Checked with my flashlight but couldn't see anyone. Creepy. HAT. 9. Found strange necklace hanging from my tent this morning. Local prank? Not funny. I dropped the notebook as if it had burned me. My lungs seemed to lock, refusing to draw breath. This woman, Melissa, had experienced exactly what was happening to me. Had someone been stalking her too? And where was she now? The realization came with a wave of nausea. I needed to get help. Not just for myself, but potentially for Melissa Scott as well. I repacked her belongings as best I could and hoisted her backpack along with my own. The extra weight slowed me, but I couldn't bring myself to leave it behind. The trail seemed different on the return journey, subtle changes in the landscape that made me question my direction more than once. Hadn't there been a large, fallen log here yesterday? Wasn't this section supposed to curve to the right, not left? I checked my map repeatedly, growing increasingly certain that something was wrong. The landmarks weren't matching up. The trail markers, which had been clearly visible blue blazes yesterday, now seemed faded and sporadic. By midday, when I should have been approaching the parking area, I found myself instead at an unfamiliar fork in the path. Neither direction was marked on my map. I stood paralyzed with indecision, the weight of both packs digging into my shoulders. The sense of being watched had returned, more intense than before, a prickling awareness that raised gooseflesh along my arms despite the midday warmth. From somewhere in the trees came the whistle. 3 notes, faint but distinct. I chose the right fork, moving faster now, ignoring the protests from my overtaxed muscles. The path grew narrower, less defined, the underbrush encroaching from both sides. Still, I pressed on, convinced that any direction was better than standing still, better than waiting for whatever was stalking me to catch up. After another half hour, the trail disappeared entirely. I stood in a small clearing, turning in a complete circle, searching for any sign of the path. Nothing. only unbroken forest in all directions. For the first time, real panic set in. Not the controllable fear of the night before, but something primal and overwhelming. I was lost. The rational part of my brain suggested backtracking to the fork, but when I turned, the way I'd come was no longer visible. It was as if the forest had closed in behind me. I fumbled for my phone, knowing it was useless but desperate for any connection to the outside world. The screen remained stubbornly blank. Dead battery? Impossible, since I'd charged it fully before leaving home and had barely used it. The sun was already lowering toward the western horizon. I had perhaps 3 hours of daylight left, and no idea which direction would lead me back to the marked trails. My orienteering skills were rudimentary at best. I could identify north using the moss on trees, but that knowledge seemed useless when I didn't know which direction would lead to safety. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement between distant trees. A figure too far away to make out clearly but unmistakably human. Without thinking, I called out, "Hey, can you help me? I'm lost." The figure paused, then raised an arm in what might have been acknowledgement. Relief flooded through me. Another hiker, perhaps, someone who knew these woods and could guide me back. I started toward them, forcing my way through the underbrush. But as I drew closer, something made me slow my approach. The figure hadn't moved, remaining perfectly still among the trees. And there was something wrong about its proportions. Too tall, too thin, its arms still raised in that unnatural greeting. I stopped, suddenly uncertain. "Hello." The figure lowered its arm slowly, then took a single step in my direction. The movement was smooth but somehow wrong, fluid in a way human locomotion isn't. A shaft of late-afternoon sunlight broke through the canopy, illuminating the space between us. It wasn't a person. What stood watching me defied easy description. Human-shaped, yes, but stretched and distorted, its limbs too long for its torso. It wore what might once have been clothing, dark, tattered fabric that hung from its frame, but its face, what should have been a face, was obscured by a crude mask or hood with only 2 dark openings where eyes should be. I stood paralyzed, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. The thing lifted its elongated fingers to what passed for its face and emitted the now familiar whistle. Those same 3 notes that had been haunting me since I entered the forest. My paralysis broke. I turned and ran, heedless of direction, crashing through underbrush, branches whipping against my face and arms. Melissa Scott's backpack caught on something, yanking me backward. I shrugged out of both packs, abandoning them as I fled. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to buckle. Only then did I dare to look back. Nothing pursued me, at least nothing I could see. I bent double, hands on knees, gulping air. When I could breathe normally again, I took the stock of my situation. I'd lost everything: my gear, my phone, my water. The sun was low now, golden light slanting through the trees. I had maybe an hour before darkness, and no way to survive a night in the open forest. I had to keep moving. Using the setting sun as a guide, I pushed westward, reasoning that the parking area and road lay in that general direction. The forest grew denser as I walked, the spaces between trees shrinking until I had to turn sideways to slip between trunks. The ground beneath my feet grew softer, mushier. The smell I'd noticed the night before returned. That same rotting, organic stench, stronger now. The trees suddenly opened into a wide clearing dominated by what appeared to be an abandoned structure. A crude cabin or shed, its wood gray with age, roof partially collapsed. Behind it stretched a small stagnant pond, its surface a slick of algae broken by protruding dead wood. I approached the cabin cautiously. It looked long abandoned, but it might offer shelter for the coming night, or at the very least, a defensible position with walls at my back. The door hung askew on rusted hinges. I pushed it open, wincing at the groan of metal. The interior was a single room, empty save for the collapsed remains of what might have been furniture and a stone fireplace along the far wall. Fading light filtered through gaps in the roof and a single grimy window. The dirt floor was disturbed in places, showing signs of recent foot traffic. Something crunched underfoot as I entered. I looked down to see small bones scattered near the entrance. Rodents, birds, perhaps larger animals. A hunter's cabin, maybe, long forgotten as the park boundaries were established. But there was something deliberate about the arrangement of the bones, not scattered randomly but placed in distinct patterns across the packed earth. My eyes followed the design, trying to make sense of it. Circles within circles, connected by lines that formed a crude but recognizable shape, a human figure with elongated limbs, like the thing I'd seen in the forest. New fear coursed through me. This wasn't a random encounter. Something lived here, something that hunted in these woods, something that had taken an interest in hikers like Melissa Scott and me. As if summoned by my realization, a whistle sounded from just outside the cabin. 3 notes, so close that whatever, made the sound must be just beyond the doorway. I backed toward the fireplace, searching desperately for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers closed around a piece of broken furniture. A chair leg, solid and heavy in my hand. The whistling came again, then a soft scraping at the door. The last daylight was fading rapidly, the cabin's interior dissolving into shadow. I braced myself, wood club raised, as a figure appeared in the doorway, a silhouette against the darkening sky. Not the stretched, distorted shape I'd seen earlier. This was unmistakably human, a man of average height and build, dressed in what looked like ranger's clothes. Relief made my knees weak. "Thank God," I breathed. "I've been lost for hours. There's something out there." The man stepped fully into the cabin, and my relief evaporated. His uniform was right, the olive drab shirt and pants of the Park Service, but everything else was wrong. His movements were stiff, mechanical. And his face. In the dimming light, his features seemed to shift and flow, never quite settling into a recognizable arrangement. One moment, I saw a middle-aged man with deep-set eyes. The next, something else entirely. Something wearing human skin that didn't quite fit. He smiled, and the expression traveled too slowly across his face, like a ripple disturbing still water. "Michelle Young," he said in the same raspy, genderless voice I'd heard outside my tent. "We've been waiting for you to find your way here." I gripped the chair leg tighter. "Who are you? What do you want?" The ranger, or the thing wearing ranger's clothing, cocked his head at an impossible angle. "We are the caretakers of Tuckahoe. We've always been here, long before your kind named these woods." He reached into his pocket and withdrew something that gleamed dully in the fading light, the tooth necklace. "You left our gift behind," he said, disappointment evident in his tone. "Just like the other one. Melissa didn't understand either." "Where is she?" I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. "What did you do to her?" "She's here," he replied simply. "She stays with us now. They all do, eventually. Those who wander from the path." As if on cue, there came a shuffling from outside, multiple sets of footsteps approaching the cabin. The ranger's smile widened, stretching beyond the confines of a human face. "The others are coming to welcome you, Michelle. Soon you'll understand. Soon you'll be part of Tuckahoe, too." I didn't wait to see what would emerge from the darkness. I lunged forward, swinging the chair leg with all my strength. It connected with the ranger's head with a sound like wet clay being slapped. He staggered sideways, more surprised than hurt, his face rippling like disturbed water. I pushed past him and burst through the doorway into near total darkness. Shapes moved in the gloom, figures arrayed in a loose semicircle around the cabin entrance. In the last fading light, I could make out their distorted silhouettes, some tall and thin like the creature I'd seen earlier, others hunched and misshapen. All of them wrong in ways that defied description. Among them stood what might once have been a woman, auburn hair matted around a face that seemed partially melted, features running together like wax. Around her neck hung a necklace identical to the one the ranger had offered me, Melissa Scott, or what remained of her. They began to whistle, all of them together, that same three-note pattern repeated in eerie harmony. The sound seemed to vibrate in my bones, pulling at something deep inside me. For a moment, I felt an inexplicable urge to join them, to stay in these woods forever. The moment passed. I ran. I had no direction, no plan beyond escape. I plunged into the forest, away from the cabin and the pond, away from those whistling figures. Behind me came sounds of pursuit, not just footsteps, but something else. A slithering, rushing noise like wind through dry grass. The forest floor began to slope upward. I was climbing, my lungs burning, legs pumping mechanically. The darkness was nearly complete now, but fear gave me an animal's night vision. I dodged trees by instinct, scrambled over fallen logs, pushed through thickets that tore at my clothing and skin. The whistling followed, sometimes seeming to come from directly beside me, other times from far behind. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, dark shapes flowing between trees, keeping pace effortlessly. The slope grew steeper. I was climbing a ridge now, the forest thinning slightly as the elevation increased. Below and behind me, the whistling continued, but it seemed to be falling back, growing fainter. Something about the higher ground was keeping them at bay. When I reached the crest of the ridge, I stopped, gasping for breath. Below me stretched darkness, but in the distance, impossibly far but unmistakable, were lights. Civilization. A road, perhaps, or the outskirts of a town. Hope surged through me. If I could reach those lights before dawn, before whatever hunted me regained its strength. A noise behind me made me turn. Partway down the slope stood the ranger figure, his outline barely visible in the darkness. He wasn't trying to climb, just watching me from that unnatural distance. "You can run, Michelle." His voice carried clearly despite the separation. "But you're marked now. You'll come back to us eventually. They always do." He lifted his hand, and even from this distance I could see the necklace dangling from his fingers. I turned and continued along the ridge, moving as fast as I dared in the darkness, putting distance between myself and the watching figure. The ridge eventually began to descend, leading me down toward what I desperately hoped was the edge of the park, toward those distant lights. I walked through the night, following the descending terrain, exhaustion and fear taking turns at the helm of my consciousness. Sometime before dawn, I stumbled onto a gravel road, narrow but unmistakably man-made. I could have wept with relief. The road led me to a small gas station and convenience store just opening for the morning. The bewildered attendant, a teenager with wide eyes and a pronounced stutter, let me use the phone to call for help. I must have looked like a wild woman, with torn clothes, bloody scratches on my arms and face, hair matted with leaves and twigs. The police came, then park rangers, real ones with solid faces that didn't shift and eyes that stayed where they belonged. They asked questions I couldn't properly answer, exchanged glances when I mentioned whistling and necklaces made of teeth. They organized a search party for Melissa Scott, though I could tell from their expressions they didn't expect to find her. They didn't. Nor did they find any trace of my abandoned gear, or the ruined cabin by the pond, or the strange bone patterns on its floor. According to their maps, I'd somehow crossed nearly 7 miles of dense forest in a single night, a journey that should have been impossible in daylight, let alone in complete darkness. "You're lucky," the lead ranger told me as I sat wrapped in a shock blanket in the back of an ambulance. "We've had hikers go missing in Tuckahoe before. Most of them don't find their way out." I wanted to tell him that luck had nothing to do with it, that something in those woods had let me go, confident I would return. But the words wouldn't come. Already the experiences were taking on a dreamlike quality, details blurring at the edges. Had I really seen a woman with a melted face? Had the ranger's features really shifted like ripples on water? They escorted me from the park in a police cruiser. As we passed the main entrance, I glanced out the window at the weathered visitor center and information board. Something caught my eye. A small symbol carved into the wooden signpost, partially obscured by moss and lichen. 3 curved lines connected by a vertical stroke. The same symbol I'd seen etched into the tooth necklace. That was 6 months ago. I've moved since then, leaving Dover for a small apartment in Philadelphia. I see a therapist twice weekly who specializes in trauma and exposure therapy. I am getting better, slowly rebuilding a life that doesn't revolve around what happened in those woods. But sometimes, in the moments between waking and sleep, I hear it, that 3-note whistle, so faint it might be imagination. And around the same time each month I find myself researching Tuckahoe State Park, studying trail maps, planning a return journey I never quite make. Not yet, anyway, but the urge grows stronger each time, because the ranger was right about one thing. I'm marked now, and sooner or later I'll go back to those woods. They're waiting for me. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 29 years old. This happened in the Beaver Valley area of northern Delaware, near the Pennsylvania border, just last autumn. I'd always been the adventurous type, someone who found peace in solitude and the whispers of the wilderness rather than the constant chatter of city life. After 3 years of working at a marketing firm in Wilmington where the walls felt like they were closing in, I decided I needed an escape, something to remind me why I fell in love with the outdoors in the first place. Delaware isn't known for its wilderness. We're a small state after all, but the northern region near the Pennsylvania border offers pockets of surprising isolation. I'd read about the trails around Beaver Valley, part of the First State National Historical Park, where the forests grow denser and civilization feels more distant than you'd expect in our tiny state. Local hiking forums mentioned some unmarked trails that branched off from the main paths, promising undisturbed views and pristine nature. The secluded areas were described as Delaware's hidden gems by the few who had ventured there. I packed light, a small tent, sleeping bag, 3 days' worth of food, water purification tabs, my phone, though I knew service would be spotty at best, a good knife, and my trusty hiking boots that had seen better days but never failed me. The forecast promised mild weather, perfect for an October hike. What I didn't pack was company. I'd broken up with David 6 months earlier, and my closest friend Megan was away visiting family. This would be my first solo overnight trip, but I wasn't worried. I'd always been self-reliant, and the solitude was part of the appeal. I needed time alone with my thoughts, away from deadlines and expectations. I arrived at the Beaver Valley parking lot early Thursday morning. The lot was empty except for a single pickup truck, which I assumed belonged to a park ranger or early morning jogger. The air was crisp with autumn, carrying the sweet scent of decaying leaves and damp earth. I took a deep breath, shouldered my pack, and headed toward the trailhead. The main trail was well marked, a dirt path winding through golden-leaved oaks and maples. Red trail blazes guided the way as I hiked for about 2 miles, enjoying the rhythm of my boots against the packed earth and the occasional chatter of squirrels preparing for winter. About an hour in, I spotted the unmarked path I'd read about online, a narrow break in the underbrush that veered eastward, away from the standard route. The path was overgrown but discernible, and I felt a little thrill of adventure as I turned onto it. This was what I'd come for, something off the beaten path, away from the weekend hikers and their noisy children. The forest grew denser here, the trees taller and closer together, their canopies allowing only dappled sunlight to reach the forest floor. I hiked for another 3 hours, stopping occasionally to consult my map and compass. The unmarked trail eventually connected with what appeared to be an old logging road, now mostly reclaimed by nature. By mid-afternoon, I reached a small clearing beside a creek, perfect for setting up camp. The water burbled pleasantly over smooth stones, and a fallen log offered a natural bench. I set up my tent, gathered some firewood, and settled in to enjoy a simple dinner as dusk approached. That's when I first noticed something odd. The forest had gone quiet. The birds that had been singing all day fell silent, and even the creek seemed to lower its voice. I've spent enough time outdoors to know that sudden silence in the woods usually means a predator is nearby, typically a fox or coyote, maybe a black bear if you're unlucky. I scanned the tree line but saw nothing unusual. "Just a fox," I said aloud, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. "Nothing to worry about." But the silence persisted as darkness fell. No owls hooted, no night insects chirped, just the occasional crack of a branch or rustle of leaves that could easily have been the wind. Except there was no wind that night. The air was completely still. I built my fire higher, the dancing flames providing both warmth and comfort. I kept my knife within reach as I heated water for tea, trying to shake the growing unease that crawled along my spine. That's when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic thumping from somewhere in the darkness beyond my camp. Too regular to be an animal, too soft to be a person walking. Thump, thump, thump. "Hello," I called out, my voice wavering slightly. "Is someone there?" The thumping stopped instantly. The silence that followed was somehow worse, heavy with expectation. I strained my ears but heard nothing except the crackle of my fire. After several minutes, I convinced myself it had been my imagination, or maybe just the strange acoustics of the forest playing tricks on me. I crawled into my tent shortly after, zipping the door closed and nestling into my sleeping bag. Despite my unease, exhaustion from the day's hike soon pulled me towards sleep. Just before drifting off, I could have sworn I heard a whisper, so faint it might have been the rustle of leaves. "Emily." I bolted upright, heart hammering against my ribs. Nobody knew I was here, nobody knew exactly where I'd gone, and nobody out here should know my name. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound brave despite the fear that clawed at my throat. No answer came. I fumbled for my flashlight and knife, hands trembling. The thin nylon of my tent suddenly felt like inadequate protection from whatever waited in the darkness. I unzipped the tent door just enough to shine my light outside, sweeping the beam across the clearing. The campfire had died down to glowing embers, casting a faint red glow over the immediate area. Beyond that, my flashlight illuminated only trees, shadows, and more trees. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. I was alone. Or so I thought. I must have fallen asleep eventually, though I don't remember when. What I do remember is waking suddenly in the darkest part of night to the sound of something circling my tent. Heavy footsteps, too deliberate to be an animal, too irregular to be a human. They would stop occasionally, and I could feel the weight of attention focused on me through the thin fabric wall. My mouth was desert dry as I clutched my knife with white knuckles. I didn't call out this time. Some primal instinct told me to remain silent, to pretend I wasn't there. The footsteps continued their slow circuit around my tent, and then I heard a sound that turns my blood to ice even now as I recall it. The sound of sniffing, like something was trying to catch my scent. But the sniffing was wrong. Wet, ragged, and coming from much higher than where a bear or coyote's nose would be. Whatever was outside was tall. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag as the thing, I couldn't think of it as a person anymore, continued its investigation. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the footsteps receded, fading into the forest. I didn't sleep again that night, keeping my knife clutched to my chest until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the tent fabric. Morning revealed nothing unusual in my camp. No footprints, no disturbed gear, no signs that anything had visited in the night. Had I dreamed it? The rational part of my brain wanted to believe so, but the cold knot of dread in my stomach suggested otherwise. I decided to cut my trip short. 3 days alone suddenly seemed like a terrible idea. I'd hike back to the main trail and then to my car, perhaps stopping at the ranger station to ask if there had been any reports of strange activity in the area. I packed quickly, leaving the campsite by 7 a.m. But as I tried to retrace my steps, nothing looked familiar. The old logging road I'd followed seemed to have vanished, replaced by dense underbrush with no clear path. I consulted my map and compass, certain I was heading in the right direction, but landmarks I'd noted on the way in were either missing or somehow altered. By midday, I had to admit I was lost. My phone showed no service as expected, but its GPS function was glitching, the blue dot of my location jumping erratically across the screen, sometimes showing me miles from where I should be, sometimes disappearing altogether. The compass was working fine, but it seemed useless when none of the terrain matched my expectations. The forest had changed too. The trees were older here, gnarled and massive, their trunks twisted into shapes that seemed almost deliberate. The undergrowth was sparse, the ground covered in a thick carpet of moss that muffled my footsteps. I didn't recognize any of these species from my hike in, which was impossible in an area as small as Beaver Valley. As afternoon wore on, I found myself in a section of forest that seemed older still. The trees here were enormous, their canopies so dense that little sunlight penetrated to the forest floor. The air felt different too, heavier, charged with something I couldn't name, and the silence remained absolute. No birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind through leaves. Then I saw the stones. They were arranged in a rough circle about 20 feet in diameter, each stone standing about waist high. They weren't the neat, uniform stones of a modern construction. These were rough-hewn, weathered by centuries, covered in lichen and moss. Some bore faint carvings, now mostly eroded but still visible if you looked closely. Spirals, strange angular symbols, and what looked disturbingly like stylized human figures in poses of agony. I knew I should turn around and walk away. Every instinct screamed danger. But curiosity, that fatal human flaw, drew me closer. I approached the circle slowly, my boots sinking into the moss with each step. The air grew colder as I neared, though the day wasn't particularly chilly. At the center of the circle was a flat stone that could only be described as an altar. Its surface was stained with dark patches that I desperately hoped were just lichen or mineral deposits. Arranged around the central stone were smaller objects, animal bones, feathers, bits of fur, and what looked horribly like human teeth, yellowed with age. My heart pounded in my ears as I backed away. Whatever this place was, I wanted no part of it. I turned to leave and found myself face to face with an old woman. She hadn't been there a moment before. I would have heard someone approach in this deathly, silent forest. Yet there she stood, barely 5 feet tall, her body bent with age, her face a web of deep wrinkles surrounding eyes that were unnaturally bright, too aware, too hungry. "You're a long way from the trail, girl," she said, her voice surprisingly melodic for someone who looked so ancient. Her clothes were odd. Not modern hiking gear, but not pioneer garb either. Just strange, hand-stitched garments in muted colors that seemed to blend with the forest. "I'm just trying to get back to the main path," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I expected. "I think I took a wrong turn." The old woman smiled, revealing teeth that were too perfect, too white for her weathered face. "Oh, you took a turn all right. Not many find their way to the Hollow Pines these days. Not many at all." Hollow Pines? I'd never heard of any area by that name in Delaware's parks or forests. "I didn't mean to trespass," I said, trying to edge around her. "I'll just be on my way." "Trespass?" She laughed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. "Child, you can't trespass where you've been invited." A chill ran through me. "I wasn't invited anywhere. I'm just hiking." "Aren't you, though?" Her eyes glittered with amusement. "Dreams have been sent to you for months now. Dreams of forests and freedom. Did you think those yearnings were your own?" My mouth went dry. It was true. I'd been dreaming of forests for months. Vivid dreams that left me longing for wilderness when I woke. But that was just coincidence. Stress from work manifesting in my subconscious. It had to be. "Who are you?" I demanded. "Names have power here," she replied, her smile widening impossibly. "You can call me Agnes, though it's not what the others call me. What brings you to my woods, Emily Hall?" My blood froze. "How do you know my name?" "I know the names of all who enter my domain, just as I knew your mother's name when she wandered here 30 years ago." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. My mother had disappeared when I was just an infant. The official story was that she'd abandoned the family, but my father always insisted something had happened to her, that she'd never willingly leave her baby behind. "My mother never came to Delaware," I said, but uncertainty crept into my voice. "Didn't she? Memory is such a fragile thing." Agnes reached into a pouch at her waist and pulled out a small object, holding it up so it caught what little light filtered through the canopy. It was a silver locket, the exact match to the one in the single photograph I had of my mother, the one she was wearing when she held me as a newborn. "Where did you get that?" I whispered. "She traded it," Agnes said simply, "for safe passage, but in the end, she couldn't pay the full price." She tucked the locket away. "Perhaps you'll do better." I backed away, bumping into one of the standing stones. "I'm leaving now. Keep the locket, I don't care." "Oh, but I think you do care, Emily. I think you care very much." Agnes took a step toward me, and though she moved with the slowness of age, I felt rooted to the spot, unable to flee. "And you're not going anywhere until you hear my offer." "What offer?" I asked, playing for time, eyes darting around for an escape route. "The same one I gave your mother. A simple trade, something you'll barely miss, for something you desperately want." Her bright eyes bored into mine. "I can tell you everything about her. Why she came here, what she was seeking, where she went after. All her secrets, Emily. All you have to do is stay a while and listen." The temptation was overwhelming. I'd spent my entire life wondering about the woman who gave birth to me, constructing elaborate fantasies about who she was and why she left. And now, answers were being dangled before me like bait. Like bait. The thought pierced through my haze of longing. Whatever this woman, this Agnes, was offering, it came with a cost she wasn't revealing. "No deal," I said firmly, finding my courage at last. "I need to go now." Agnes's face changed, the grandmotherly facade slipping to reveal something ancient and cruel beneath. "No one refuses me in my own circle, girl." She raised a gnarled hand, and the forest around us seemed to respond, the shadows deepening, the trees creaking as they leaned inward, the very air growing thick and difficult to breathe. The standing stones began to hum with a low vibration that I felt in my bones. Fight or flight kicked in, and I chose flight. I shoved past Agnes with a burst of desperate strength, half expecting her bony hands to grab me, but she merely laughed as I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, not caring about direction, just needing to put distance between myself and that terrible circle of stones. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs trembled, finally collapsing beside a fallen tree. The forest here looked more normal. Younger trees, natural undergrowth, even the occasional bird call. Had I imagined the encounter? The thought was tempting but impossible. The image of that silver locket, my mother's locket, was burned into my mind. As my breathing slowed, I took stock of my situation. I still had my pack, my phone, still no service, my compass. The sun was getting low. I'd need to find shelter soon. I checked my compass, decided that continuing west was my best chance of hitting a marked trail, and set off at a brisk walk. The light was fading fast when I spotted something through the trees, a structure of some kind. As I drew closer, I saw it was a cabin, weathered but apparently solid, with a small porch and shuttered windows. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, suggesting occupation. Hope surged through me. Civilization! Someone who could point me toward the right path, maybe even give me a ride back to my car. I approached the cabin eagerly, climbed the creaking steps to the porch, and knocked on the door. "Hello, is anyone home? "I'm lost and could use some help," I called. Silence answered me. I knocked again, louder this time. The door swung open slowly, revealing a dimly lit interior. The single room was sparsely furnished. A rough wooden table with 2 chairs, a stone fireplace with a cooking pot suspended above low flames, a narrow bed against the far wall. A kerosene lamp provided the only light besides the fire. "Hello?" I called again, stepping cautiously over the threshold. "I don't mean to intrude, but I'm lost in the woods and need directions." The cabin appeared empty, yet the fire was burning and the lamp was lit. Someone had been here recently and might return soon. I decided to wait, grateful for the shelter as twilight deepened into night outside. I slumped into one of the wooden chairs, exhaustion catching up to me. The events of the day swirled in my mind. The strange night visitor getting lost, the stone circle, Agnes with her impossible knowledge, and my mother's locket. It was too much to process. My eyes fell on an old book lying open on the table, its pages yellowed with age. Curious, I pulled it closer. It appeared to be a journal, the handwriting cramped but legible. I skimmed a few paragraphs and felt my blood run cold. October 15th, 1991. I've been in these woods for 3 days now, searching for any sign of Sarah. The locals think I'm crazy. They say people who go missing in the hollow pines stay missing. But I know my wife wouldn't leave our baby girl unless something terrible happened. I followed her trail to an old stone circle deep in the forest. The carvings there matched the symbols Sarah had been drawing obsessively in the weeks before she disappeared. Tomorrow, I return with offerings for the old witch the locals whisper about. God help me, but I'll make any deal necessary to find my Sarah. My hands trembled as I turned the page. The next entry was dated several days later, October 20th, 1991. The witch took my offerings but demands more. Always more. She wears Sarah's locket around her neck, proof she knows something. She calls me by name, though I never introduced myself. Says she'll tell me where to find Sarah if I bring her something of our child's. I refused. Some prices are too high. I'm being watched constantly now. Something follows me through the woods at night. I fear I won't leave this forest alive. The next page was blank except for a dark brown stain that looked horribly like dried blood. My heart thundered in my chest. This was my father's journal. These were his words. Written 7 years before his death in a car accident. An accident I'd always thought suspicious given that he rarely drank but supposedly died drunk behind the wheel. He had come looking for my mother and found Agnes instead. And now, somehow, I had stumbled upon his cabin. A cabin that shouldn't exist in a state park. A cabin that looked decades old yet was mysteriously maintained. The sound of footsteps on the porch jolted me from my horrified trance. The door creaked open wider and a figure stepped into the cabin. A man in his mid-30s with my eyes and my father's jawline, dressed in clothes at least 20 years out of style. "Dad?" I whispered, though it was impossible. My father had died when I was 8. Even if he had somehow survived, he'd be in his 60s now, not the young man who stood before me. He looked at me with no recognition in his eyes. "Who are you? How did you find this place?" His voice was just as I remembered from childhood. Deep, slightly rough with a hint of the southern accent he'd tried to hide. "I'm Emily," I said, my voice trembling. "Emily Hall. I'm your daughter." His expression hardened. "My daughter is 8 years old and safe at her grandmother's house in Baltimore. I don't know what game you're playing, but you used to sing 'You Are My Sunshine' to me every night before bed," I interrupted, the words tumbling out. "You carved a tiny wooden fox for my 6th birthday because it was my favorite animal. You have a scar on your left palm from when you tried to catch a kitchen knife that was falling toward me." Tears streamed down my face. "You died when I was 8 years old, in a car crash on Route 1. Except you didn't, did you? You never left these woods." His face had gone pale. "That's not possible. It's 1991. My Emily is... It's 2024, Dad. I'm 29 years old." He staggered backward, bracing himself against the wall. No, that can't be right. I've only been in these woods for a few days, searching for your mother. You've been here for 33 years, I said gently. Time moves differently here, doesn't it? In the hollow pines. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by horror. The witch, he whispered. She did this, trapped me here while the world moved on. He looked at me with desperate hope. But you found me. You can help me escape. We can both get out of here, find your mother. She offered you a deal, didn't she? Just like she offered me. Information about Mom in exchange for something. He nodded slowly. She wanted something of yours? Blood, hair, a personal item, something to bind you to this place. I refused. His expression darkened. So she bound me instead. I can't leave the forest. I've tried, countless times. The paths always circle back to this cabin. That's why I couldn't find my way back to the trail, I realized. She's doing the same thing to me, testing me. You need to leave, Emily. Now, before midnight. There's still time. The urgency in his voice frightened me. I'm not leaving without you, I insisted. You don't understand. Tonight is Samhain, what some call Halloween. The barrier between worlds is thinnest tonight. It's when she takes her tribute. Anyone trapped in these woods becomes fair game. As if summoned by his words, a howl echoed through the forest outside. Not animal, not human, but something in between. My father's face went ashen. They're coming, her hunters. What hunters? Dad, you're scaring me. He moved quickly around the cabin, gathering items. A knife similar to mine, a small pouch of what looked like herbs, and a flask of liquid that smelled strongly of alcohol when he uncorked it. The lost ones, those who made deals they couldn't keep. She transforms them, binds them to her will. They hunt for her on Samhain night. He pressed the knife into my hand. Iron. They fear it. The herbs will mask your scent for a while. Another howl, closer this time, was joined by a second, then a third. A chorus of inhuman voices celebrating the hunt. We need to run, my father said, taking my hand. There's a stream about half a mile east. If we can cross it before they catch our scent. The window shattered inward, showering the room with glass as something large and dark crashed through. My father shoved me behind him as the thing unfolded itself from the floor. Humanoid, but wrong, its proportions distorted, limbs too long, joints bending in impossible directions. Its face was the worst part. Recognizably human, but stretched and twisted. The mouth a yawning pit filled with needle-like teeth. The eyes solid black and weeping a thick, dark substance. "Run, Emily!" my father shouted, throwing the contents of the flask at the creature. The liquid splashed across its face and it shrieked, the sound piercing my eardrums like physical pain. The thing's skin smoked and bubbled where the liquid touched. I stumbled backward toward the door, but my legs felt like lead. The creature, still reeling from whatever my father had thrown at it, suddenly locked its black eyes on me. Recognition flickered in those inhuman depths. "Emily?" It rasped, the voice disturbingly familiar despite the guttural distortion. "Emily Hall?" Ice flooded my veins. It knew me. "Don't listen," my father warned, positioning himself between us. "They use familiar voices to lure you closer." But something about this voice froze me in place. It sounded like, no, it couldn't be. "Megan," I whispered. The creature cocked its head, a too human gesture that made my skin crawl. "You left me behind," it said in Megan's voice, my best friend's voice, though warped and wrong. "You always leave everyone behind." "That's not Megan," my father insisted, grabbing my arm. "Your friend is safe at home. This thing is playing with your mind." But doubt had taken root. Hadn't Megan said she was visiting family? What if she'd actually come looking for me when I didn't return her texts? What if she'd stumbled into these woods just like I had? The creature that spoke with Megan's voice took a shambling step forward. "I followed you. Got lost. She found me. She changed me." Each sentence was punctuated by another step. "Hungry now? So hungry, Em." My father threw something else at the creature, some of the herbs from his pouch. They burst into green flame upon contact, and the thing screeched, backing toward the broken window. "Now, Emily, run!" My father pulled me toward the door. This time my legs responded. We burst out of the cabin and into the night. The forest was alive with sounds now. Howls, crashes through underbrush, the splintering of wood as branches broke under the weight of things moving too fast through the trees. We ran east, following a narrow game trail. I could hear pursuit behind us. Not just one creature, but several, communicating with those eerie howls that raised the hair on my neck. My father kept a grip on my hand, pulling me along when I stumbled, his knowledge of the terrain our only advantage. The trees thinned slightly, and I caught glimpses of the moon overhead, full and orange-tinged, casting just enough light to see by. In that ghostly illumination, I spotted movement among the trees, twisted shapes loping alongside us, keeping pace but not attacking, herding us. "They're driving us somewhere," I gasped to my father. He nodded grimly. "Toward the circle, toward her." As if to confirm his words, I spotted a familiar standing stone through the trees ahead. We were approaching the stone circle from earlier, but from a different direction. Had we really run in a circle, or had the forest itself rearranged to guide us here? My father pulled up short, yanking me behind a massive oak tree. "We can't go into the circle," he whispered. "That's what she wants. Once inside, her power is absolute." "But they're everywhere," I said, peering around the trunk. The creatures, I counted at least 5 distinct shapes, had formed a loose ring around us, gradually tightening. My father pressed the herb pouch into my hand. "Take this. When I create a distraction, you run for the stream. It's straight that way." He pointed east. "Don't stop, don't look back, and whatever you do, don't enter the circle." "I'm not leaving you," I insisted. "Emily." He gripped my shoulders, his eyes intense in the moonlight. "I've been trapped here for decades. There's no escape for me, but you still have a chance." He smiled sadly. "My brave girl. I've missed so much of your life. I won't let her take the rest of it, too." Before I could protest further, he kissed my forehead and stepped out from behind the tree. "Agnes," he shouted, "I'm ready to make a deal." The forest fell silent. Even the creatures stilled, their attention shifting to my father. 33 years is long enough," he continued, walking slowly toward the stone circle. "I'll give you what you want. My service, my loyalty, everything. Just let my daughter go." A figure emerged from the shadows between 2 standing stones. Agnes, looking exactly as she had earlier, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "James Hall," she said, her melodic voice carrying clearly through the night air. "You refused my generous offer once before. Why should I believe you now? Because I've seen what becomes of those who defy you." My father gestured toward the creatures surrounding us. "I'm tired of running, tired of fighting. I just want my daughter safe." Agnes studied him, her head tilted in that bird-like way. "A noble sacrifice, but unnecessary." Her gaze shifted, looking directly at my hiding place. "Come out, Emily Hall. Your father can't save you. No one can." I clutched the iron knife and herb pouch, fear warring with the desperate need to help my father. He had positioned himself between me and most of the creatures, creating a narrow corridor of escape to the east. It was now or never. I sprinted from behind the tree, not toward the circle but away from it, toward where my father had indicated the stream lay. I heard shrieks of rage behind me and the sound of pursuit crashing through the underbrush. My father shouted something I couldn't make out, followed by Agnes's furious command. "Bring her to me, alive!" I ran as I'd never run before, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. The herb pouch bounced against my hip, and I remembered my father's instructions. Without slowing, I untied the pouch and scattered its contents behind me as I ran. A howl of frustration told me it was working. The herbs were masking my scent or perhaps irritating my pursuers in some way. The trees began to thin, and I heard the welcome sound of running water ahead. The stream! If I could just cross it. Something crashed into me from the side, sending me sprawling. The knife flew from my grasp, landing somewhere in the underbrush. I rolled onto my back to face my attacker, expecting one of the twisted, formerly human hunters. Instead, I found myself looking up at my father. "Dad?" I gasped, relief washing over me. "How did you—" "Sorry about the rough handling," he said, helping me to my feet. "But we need to hurry. They're right behind us." I could hear them, thrashing through the forest, those inhuman howls closing in. The stream burbled nearby, just beyond the next line of trees. "Come on," he urged, pulling me toward the sound of water. We broke through the tree line to find a wide stream, its surface glittering in the moonlight. The opposite bank looked normal, just ordinary forest without the ancient, oppressive feeling of the woods we'd been traversing. "Cross, quickly," my father instructed. "The water will wash away any trace Agnes might use to track you." I stepped toward the stream, but hesitated. Something felt wrong. I turned back to look at my father, really look at him. He stood too still, his face expressionless in the moonlight. And his eyes were wrong. Not the warm brown I remembered, but a flat, muddy color without depth. "What's wrong, Emily?" he asked, his voice perfect but the inflection slightly off, like an actor who had studied his subject but couldn't quite capture the essence. I took a step back. "You're not my father." His face remained impassive for a moment, then twisted into Agnes's smile, too wide, too knowing. "Clever girl. Cleverer than your mother was." The glamour fell away, and Agnes stood before me. No longer the bent old woman, but something taller, straighter, her presence filling the small clearing with malevolent energy. "Where is my father?" I demanded, backing toward the stream. My foot touched water, and I felt a curious sensation, like a barrier giving way. "Making his sacrifice," Agnes said simply, "as he should have done years ago, as your mother refused to do." She took a step toward me. "But you won't escape either, Emily Hall. The moment you touched the stones, you became mine. All that remains is to determine what form your service will take." "I don't belong to anyone," I said, continuing to back into the stream. The cold water swirled around my ankles, then my calves as I moved deeper. Agnes's smile faltered. "Stop. You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly," I replied, now waist-deep in the rushing water. "You have no power over me unless I agree to your terms, and I refuse." Her face contorted with rage. "Your father is mine now. Your mother is mine. Stay, and I might let you see them again." The temptation was almost overwhelming. To finally reunite with the mother I'd never known, to save the father I'd thought long dead. But I recognized the trap for what it was. "No deal," I said firmly, and plunged fully into the stream. The current was stronger than it appeared, immediately sweeping me downstream. I heard Agnes shriek with rage, her cry echoed by her hunters as they burst from the forest. I fought to keep my head above water, kicking hard to angle toward the opposite bank. Something grabbed at my ankle, a gnarled hand extending impossibly from the water itself. I kicked free and kept swimming. More hands reached for me, but they seemed unable to maintain their grip as the flowing water washed over them. My lungs burned, my soaked clothes weighed me down, but terror gave me strength. Finally, I felt my feet touch bottom as I neared the far bank. I crawled out of the water onto normal, leaf-covered forest floor, gasping for breath. When I looked back across the stream, the forest on the other side had changed. The ancient, twisted trees were gone, replaced by normal woodland. Agnes stood at the water's edge, her form shifting between the old woman and something taller, darker, more primal. Her hunters crowded behind her, their distorted forms barely visible in the shadows. "This isn't over, Emily Hall," Agnes called, her voice carrying easily over the rushing water. "Your blood belongs to the hollow pines now. You'll return. They always return." As if in response to her words, too, I felt a sharp pain in my palm, the hand that had touched the standing stones. Looking down, I saw a small spiral pattern forming on my skin, like a birthmark emerging from beneath the surface. I scrambled to my feet and plunged deeper into the normal woods, not stopping until Agnes and her hunters were no longer visible behind me. The forest here felt right, alive with natural sounds, the occasional rustle of small animals, even the distant hoot of an owl. I followed the stream for what felt like hours, the water always on my left, until I spotted a flash of artificial light through the trees. A road, civilization. I stumbled toward it, emerging onto the shoulder of a 2-lane highway. A road sign gleamed in my flashlight, Route 92, Beaver Valley, Ard. I was still in Delaware, still near the park where I'd started my hike, but miles from my original entry point. A passing motorist stopped for the bedraggled woman on the roadside, me, though I hardly recognized myself in the rearview mirror of his pickup truck. My face was scratched, my clothes torn and muddy, my eyes haunted. I told him I'd gotten lost hiking and needed a ride to the nearest town. He asked no further questions, perhaps sensing I wasn't ready to provide answers. That was 3 months ago. I've tried to move on, to convince myself it was all some vivid hallucination brought on by getting lost in the woods, by dehydration, by an overactive imagination fed by local legends I must have read about without consciously remembering. But the spiral mark on my palm remains, darkening each day. And sometimes, in my dreams, I see my father standing in that cabin doorway. I see the thing that wore Megan's face and spoke with her voice. I hear Agnes whisper my name on the wind that rattles my apartment windows. Megan is fine, by the way. She really was visiting family when I went on my hike. She knows nothing about my experience, though she's commented on how distracted I've been lately, how I flinch at sudden sounds, how I refuse to go hiking anymore. I've researched the Beaver Valley area extensively since my return. There are local legends about sections of the forest where people disappear, where time moves strangely. Most are attributed to early colonial fears or Native American folklore. Nothing about a witch named Agnes or standing stones or a place called Hollow Pines. But last week, while searching through county historical records, I found something. A land deed from 1734, transferring ownership of a tract called Hollow Pines Plantation to a woman named Agnes Winters. The document described the property as bordered by ancient stones marking the realm between worlds. The same document noted that Agnes Winters had been living on the property for time beyond memory, though she appeared to be a woman of middle years. The deed was transferred not through purchase, but through trade, the previous owner's daughter for legal claim to the land. The spiral on my palm burns as I write this. It's darker today than yesterday. Sometimes I think I see faces in it. My father's, other twisted visages I don't recognize, and occasionally a woman who might be my mother. Agnes was right about one thing. I am drawn to return, to find my parents, to confront her, to end whatever cycle has ensnared my family for generations. But I won't go unprepared. I've been studying. Old books, obscure forums where people share experiences similar to mine, consultations with those who claim knowledge of the spaces between worlds. I'm learning about protection symbols, binding rituals, the power of iron and salt, and running water. The autumn equinox is approaching, the time when borders thin, when passage between realms becomes possible. I've marked the date on my calendar, though I hardly need the reminder. The spiral on my palm pulses with increasing urgency as the day draws near. If you're reading this, it means one of two things. Either I've returned successfully and am sharing my story as a warning to others, or I never came back, and someone found this account among my possessions. If it's the latter, do not come looking for me. The Hollow Pines has claimed enough of my family already. But know this, some places in this world aren't meant for humans to tread. Some bargains aren't worth the cost. And some entities have patience beyond mortal understanding, willing to wait decades for the blood they're owed. My name is Emily Hall, and by the time you read this, I'll either have broken my family's curse or become part of it. Either way, if you find yourself near Beaver Valley, stick to the marked trails. And if you hear someone call your name in the forest when no one should know you're there, run. Run, and don't look back. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 32 years old. This happened in Delaware at Trussum Pond just 2 months ago. I still wake up screaming most nights. I'd always been what you might call an indoor person. Books, tea, and Netflix. That was my comfort zone. But after my divorce from Mark last year, my therapist suggested I push my boundaries and reclaim my independence. So, when my coworkers Rachel and Stephanie suggested a weekend camping trip to Trussum Pond in southern Delaware, I shocked everyone, including myself, by saying yes. "You need this," Rachel had said, her eyes bright with excitement. "The cypress trees there are incredible, some of the northernmost in the country. It'll be like stepping into another world." She wasn't wrong about that part. Trussum Pond is tucked away in the Trap Pond State Park area, a relatively small but densely wooded wetland dominated by bald cypress trees that rise from the dark waters like ancient sentinels. I'd seen pictures online, gnarled knees of cypress breaking the water's surface, Spanish moss draping from branches like tattered ghosts. Beautiful, but somehow unsettling. Rachel was the outdoorsy one, tall, athletic, with sun-freckled skin and a confidence that bordered on recklessness. Stephanie was quieter, more methodical, always prepared with first aid kits and backup plans. And then there was me, the reluctant camper with brand new hiking boots that hadn't seen a speck of dirt. We arrived on Friday afternoon, the early October air carrying that perfect crispness that makes you feel alive. The park ranger at the entrance station, an older man with deep creases around his eyes, checked us in. "You ladies planning on staying at the primitive camping area?" he asked, eyeing my clean boots with something like amusement. "Yes, sir," Rachel answered. "We want the full experience." The ranger's smile dimmed slightly. "Just make sure you stick to the marked trails. We've had some incidents with hikers getting disoriented lately. The cypress swamp can play tricks on your sense of direction." "We'll be careful," Stephanie assured him, accepting our permits. As we walked back to the car, I noticed the ranger watching us, his weathered face unreadable. "What did he mean by incidents?" I asked. Rachel shrugged. "Probably just some unprepared tourist wandering off trail. Nothing to worry about." We parked at the small lot near the trailhead and shouldered our packs. Mine felt impossibly heavy despite Rachel helping me pack only the essentials. The main trail wound along the edge of the pond before branching into smaller paths that ventured deeper into the swamp forest. As we walked, I tried to absorb the beauty around me. The late afternoon sun filtered through the cypress canopy, creating dappled patterns on the trail. The air smelled rich with decay and new growth, that peculiar wetland scent of life and death intermingling. Birds called from unseen perches, and occasionally something would splash in the nearby water. "See, isn't this better than another weekend watching true crime documentaries?" Rachel nudged me playfully. "Ask me again when we're not being eaten alive by mosquitoes," I replied, but I was smiling. There was something enchanting about this place, a primordial beauty that made my everyday worries seem insignificant. After about an hour of hiking, we reached our designated camping area, a small clearing elevated just enough to stay dry, with the pond visible through the trees. The site was more isolated than I'd expected, with no other campers in sight. "Perfect," Rachel declared, already shrugging off her pack. "We've got it all to ourselves." Stephanie and Rachel efficiently set up our 2 tents while I gathered kindling for the fire, proud of myself for remembering what Rachel had taught me about finding dry wood. By the time dusk settled around us, we had a cheerful fire going and were sitting around it with tin cups of the wine we'd packed in. A toast, Rachel raised her cup, to Emily's first real camping trip and to new beginnings. We clinked cups, and I felt a warmth that wasn't just from the wine. Maybe my therapist was right. Maybe I needed this, to prove to myself that I could exist beyond the comfortable boundaries I'd built. The conversation flowed easily as darkness fell completely, our faces illuminated only by the dancing firelight. Rachel told ghost stories, standard campfire fare about hook-handed killers and vanishing hitchhikers, while Stephanie rolled her eyes and I pretended to be more scared than I actually was. It was nearly midnight when we first heard it, a sound like someone whistling, but not quite. A wavering, undulating tone that seemed to come from somewhere across the water. "What is that?" I asked, interrupting Rachel mid-story. We all fell silent, listening. The sound came again, rising and falling in pitch, almost like someone trying to mimic birdsong, but there was something distinctly wrong about it. "Probably just a bird," Stephanie said, but she sounded uncertain. "At night?" I countered. Rachel stood up, peering into the darkness beyond our firelight. "Could be people at another campsite." "The ranger said we were the only ones out here tonight," Stephanie reminded her. The whistling came again, closer this time, and followed by what sounded like soft laughter. "Hello?" Rachel called out. "Someone there?" No response, just the normal sounds of the night forest resuming. Frogs, insects, the occasional splash in the water. "Maybe we should turn in," Stephanie suggested, looking uneasy for the first time since we'd arrived. I was grateful for the suggestion. The strange whistling had left me with a creeping sense of unease. We doused the fire carefully and retreated to our tents, Rachel and Stephanie sharing the larger one, me in the smaller one adjacent. Inside my tent, I zipped myself securely into my sleeping bag and tried to get comfortable on the thin camping pad. The ground beneath me felt impossibly hard, every root and stone making its presence known against my back. The forest, which had seemed merely atmospheric during the day, now pressed around the thin walls of my tent with a palpable heaviness. I must have eventually drifted off because the next thing I knew, I was waking with a start. The interior of my tent was pitch black, and something had pulled me from sleep. I lay perfectly still, listening. There it was, the whistling again, but much closer now. It sounded as if it was coming from just outside my tent. The melody, if you could call it that, had changed. It was slower, more deliberate, almost like someone was trying to mimic a lullaby but couldn't quite remember the tune. Then, unmistakably, I heard footsteps, the soft crunch of leaves and twigs under careful feet circling my tent. Once, twice, 3 times. I wanted to call out to Rachel and Stephanie, but fear had frozen my vocal cords. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The screen lit up, 3:17 a.m., casting an eerie blue glow inside my tent. No service, of course. The footsteps stopped directly in front of my tent flap. I held my breath, heart hammering so loudly I was certain whoever, whatever, was out there could hear it. "Emily," a voice whispered, so close it might have been inside the tent with me. It sounded like Rachel, but not quite. The inflection was wrong, the tone too hollow. I didn't answer. "Emily, I need help," the voice continued. A perfect imitation of Rachel's voice now, but with an underlying note that raised the hair on my arms. Something's wrong with Stephanie. Still, I remained silent, every instinct screaming that something was very wrong. A hand pressed against the side of my tent, the fabric dimpling inward with the shape of splayed fingers. They slowly dragged downward, nails catching on the material with a sound like insects skittering. "I know you're awake," the voice said, no longer attempting to sound like Rachel. It was deeper now, rasping. "I can hear your heart beating." I fumbled for the small canister of bear spray I'd tucked into my sleeping bag, the only weapon I had. My hand closed around it just as something began to manipulate the zipper of my tent from the outside. In a burst of desperate courage, I lunged forward and yanked the zipper up from the inside, prepared to spray whatever waited there. Nothing. The clearing outside my tent was empty, the other tent undisturbed across the way. The night was silent except for the usual forest sounds and my own ragged breathing. Had I dreamed it? A nightmare brought on by an unfamiliar environment and too many ghost stories? I crawled out of my tent, bear spray still clutched in my white-knuckled grip, and crossed to Rachel and Stephanie's tent. "Rachel," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Steph." No answer. With trembling fingers, I unzipped their tent and peered inside. Empty sleeping bags lay neatly side by side. They were gone. Panic surged through me. I spun around, scanning the darkened campsite. "Rachel! Stephanie!" I called, no longer caring if I attracted the attention of whatever had been outside my tent. The woods swallowed my cries, the only response the soft lapping of water against the shoreline and the creaking of cypress branches in the light breeze. I grabbed my phone again and switched on the flashlight function, sweeping the beam around the campsite. That's when I noticed the footprints. Multiple sets, leading away from the tents and down toward the water's edge. One set looked like it had been made by someone being dragged. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to stay put, to wait for daylight. But these were my friends. I couldn't just wait while they might be in danger. I pulled on my boots, grabbed the bear spray and my flashlight and followed the tracks. They led down to a narrow wooden dock that extended about 20 feet into the dark water. The ancient structure groaned under my weight as I crept forward, my light reflecting off the black surface of the pond. "Rachel! Stephanie!" I called again, my voice small against the vastness of the night. A splash to my right made me jump. I swung my light toward the sound. Nothing but ripples spreading across the water's surface. That's when I noticed something floating about 10 feet from the end of the dock. Something pale, bobbing gently in the water. I directed my light at it, and my blood turned to ice. A face, or something that had once been a face, stared back at me from the water, bloated, fish belly white, with empty sockets where eyes should have been. The mouth hung open in a silent scream, black water lapping at the blue-tinged lips. I stumbled backward, a scream tearing from my throat, and collided with something solid, something that wasn't there a moment ago. Warm breath tickled my ear as hands gripped my upper arms from behind. "You shouldn't have come here, Emily," a voice whispered, a voice that somehow belonged to both Rachel and Stephanie, and neither of them. "The Lady of Trussam doesn't like visitors." I wrenched free and whirled around, bear spray raised. Rachel stood there, her silhouette black against the deeper darkness. But even in the dim light, I could see something was terribly wrong. She stood too still, her posture rigid and unnatural. And her eyes. Her eyes reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's, gleaming red in the darkness. "Rachel," I whispered, backing away. "What happened to you? Where's Stephanie?" "Stephanie joined the lady," she said, her voice containing strange harmonics, as if multiple people were speaking at once. "Just like I did. Just like you will." She took a step toward me, and I saw that her feet were bare and covered in mud. Dark water dripped from her clothes, creating a growing puddle on the wooden dock. "The Lady of Trussam has been so lonely," Rachel continued, her head tilting at an impossible angle. "Ever since they drained part of her pond for the state park, cut down her trees, drove away her children. But she's been patient. She's been collecting new children." Another splash sounded behind me. I didn't turn to look. "Rachel, this isn't you," I said, still backing away as she advanced. "Whatever's happened, we can get help." She smiled then, a terrible rictus that stretched far too wide across her face. "The Lady is help, Emily. The Lady is salvation. She takes away all your pain, all your fear. She holds you in the cool dark, and you never have to worry again." From the water around the dock, Heads began to emerge. Dozens of them, pale faces with black, hollow eyes, their hair floating around them like dark halos. Men, women, children, all staring at me with the same hungry emptiness. The lady's children. Rachel, or the thing that had been Rachel, said with something like pride, "She's been collecting them for decades." One of the faces was unmistakably Stephanie's, her features already beginning to blur and shift as the water worked its changes on her flesh. I knew then that I was going to die here, become another one of the children in this forgotten pond. My back foot met empty air. I'd reached the end of the dock. Rachel lunged forward with inhuman speed, her ice-cold hands closing around my throat. The sudden motion caused me to squeeze the trigger on the bear spray. The caustic cloud hit her directly in the face, and she reeled back with an inhuman shriek that contained multiple voices in agony. I didn't wait to see more. I shoved past her thrashing form and ran back down the dock toward shore. Behind me, the water erupted as pale forms launched themselves onto the wooden structure, crawling on all fours with terrible speed. I reached the shore and sprinted up the bank toward our campsite. I had no plan beyond getting to my car keys and getting the hell out of here. The darkness of the forest closed around me, branches seeming to reach out deliberately to snag my clothes and hair. I burst into the clearing where our tents stood, diving for my backpack where my keys were stored. As my hand closed around them, a sound from behind me made me turn. Rachel stood at the edge of the clearing, her face blistered and raw from the bear spray, but her eyes now entirely black pools. Behind her crowded more figures, waterlogged, pale, with that same empty stare, and among them, floating several inches above the ground, was something else. It might once have been a woman, but now it was something ancient and terrible. Long hair like river weeds flowed around a face that shifted between beautiful and grotesque with each subtle movement. Water streamed constantly from her tattered dress, forming a growing pool at her feet that seemed to be spreading across the forest floor toward me. "The Lady of Trusum welcomes you," Rachel intoned, her voice now completely subsumed by the strange chorus of others speaking through her. The lady extended one impossibly long, pale arm toward me, fingers elongating as they reached across the clearing. The water at my feet began to rise, soaking into my boots and climbing my legs with deliberate purpose. I don't know where I found the strength or courage, but something primitive and survival-oriented took over. I snatched a burning branch from the remains of our campfire, which had somehow reignited, and thrust it toward the approaching water. Steam hissed upward as the burning wood made contact, and a scream that could never have come from a human throat tore through the night. The lady recoiled, her fluid form rippling with rage. The water retreated momentarily, and I seized my chance. Still holding the makeshift torch, I ran for the trail that would lead back to the parking area. What followed was a nightmare of darkness, confusion, and terror. The trail that had seemed so straightforward in daylight now twisted and turned, doubling back on itself. Several times, I found myself back at the pond's edge, the dark water lapping hungrily at the shore. It was as if the landscape itself was conspiring with the lady, trying to keep me trapped in her domain. The pale figures pursued me tirelessly through the woods, their movements jerky and wrong, like poorly operated marionettes. Among them were Rachel and Stephanie, their features already beginning to blur and meld with the others, their individuality dissolving into the collective horror that served the lady. Whenever they got too close, I would thrust my burning branch at them, and they would fall back temporarily, their aversion to fire the only weakness I could exploit. But my torch was burning down, and soon I would have nothing. I don't know how long I ran, how many times I circled back to that accursed pond. Time seemed to have no meaning in that endless night. But eventually, miraculously, I stumbled onto a different trail, one that felt solid and real beneath my feet. The quality of the darkness changed, becoming less oppressive, more natural. I heard the sounds of normal wildlife, not the eerie silence that had accompanied the lady and her children. And then, up ahead, I saw it. The glint of metal reflecting moonlight. The parking lot. My car. With a final surge of desperate energy, I sprinted for my vehicle, expecting at any moment to feel cold, wet hands grabbing at my ankles. I reached the car, fumbled the key into the lock, and threw myself inside, slamming and locking the door in the same motion. Through the windows, I could see them gathered at the edge of the forest, pale faces watching me with those terrible empty eyes. Rachel and Stephanie were in front, their features now so distorted they were barely recognizable. Behind them, the Lady of Trussum herself, her form shifting and flowing like the water she commanded. I started the engine with shaking hands and peeled out of the parking lot, not caring about the gravel spraying from my tires. In my rearview mirror, I saw them standing motionless, watching me flee. They made no attempt to pursue. Perhaps they couldn't leave the vicinity of the pond, or perhaps they knew they didn't need to. They had taken my friends. They had marked me. They could be patient. I drove straight to the police station in the nearest town and told them my story, babbling about my missing friends and the lady of the pond. They were kind but skeptical, clearly assuming I was either intoxicated or suffering from some kind of psychotic break. When I led them back to Trussum Pond the next morning, we found our campsite undisturbed, no sign of struggle or pursuit. Rachel and Stephanie's belongings were all there, but of them there was no trace. The search went on for weeks. They dragged parts of the pond, brought in cadaver dogs, interviewed everyone who had been in the park that weekend. Nothing was found. Eventually, Rachel and Stephanie became just two more names on the surprisingly long list of people who had vanished in or around Trap Pond State Park over the decades. The official theory is that they wandered off trail and succumbed to exposure or injury. I know the truth is far worse. I've moved away from Delaware now, as far from water as I can get. I don't sleep well. When I do, I dream of black water and pale faces and a woman with river weeds for hair, calling me back to join her children. But the worst part, the thing that keeps me awake most nights, is the knowledge that I've been marked. Sometimes when I wash my hands or shower, I notice how the water seems to linger on my skin longer than it should, how it sometimes moves against gravity, reaching for my face like grasping fingers. And sometimes, in the stillness of night, I hear whistling, that same not quite right melody I heard at Trussum Pond, coming from my bathroom sink, from my kitchen faucet, from the pipes in the walls. The Lady of Trussum is patient. She has eternity to wait. And water, as they say, always finds a way. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 32 years old. This happened in Delaware last October, when the leaves were dying and the air carried the scent of decay. Just a weekend, Em. You promised. Rachel's voice had that familiar edge to it, the one that meant she wouldn't take no for an answer. She'd been my best friend since college, which gave her certain privileges, like guilting me into a camping trip when all I wanted was to spend my vacation days wrapped in a blanket with a book. I know. But Blackbird State Forest? In October? I shivered despite the warmth of my apartment. It's going to be freezing at night. Rachel rolled her eyes, tossing another fleece into my duffel bag. That's why they invented layers, Em, and whiskey. She patted the hip flask tucked into her belt. Besides, Nicole and Tyler are already driving up there. We can't bail now. I sighed, knowing I was defeated. Our little group from the accounting firm had been planning this trip for months, a much-needed escape from spreadsheets and corporate drudgery. Rachel, the eternal optimist. Nicole, our meticulous planner, and Tyler, who fancied himself an outdoorsman despite growing up in suburban Wilmington. Then there was me, the reluctant one, who had only agreed because everyone insisted I needed to get out more after my divorce. What none of them knew was why I hated forests, why the thought of being surrounded by trees made my skin crawl. Some childhood memories are better left buried. The drive from Dover to Blackbird State Forest took just under an hour. Rachel chatted animatedly beside me, outlining all the trails she wanted to hike while I nodded and tried to ignore the growing knot in my stomach. The closer we got to the forest, the tighter it became. "You okay?" Rachel asked as we turned onto the narrow road leading to the campground. "You've gone quiet." "Just tired," I lied, forcing a smile. "Work's been kicking my ass this week." She nodded sympathetically, but I caught the concern in her glance. We'd been friends long enough that she knew when something was off. The road narrowed further, tall pines crowding in on either side. Delaware isn't known for its wilderness. Most of the state is flat farmland or coastal areas, but Blackbird Forest was different. Nearly 6,000 acres of dense woods tucked away in the northern part of the state. It felt isolated in a way that belied how close we were to civilization. When we pulled into the campsite, Nicole's blue Subaru was already parked beside a half-assembled tent. Tyler waved enthusiastically when he spotted our car. "About time," he called out. "We were starting to think you'd chickened out." Rachel jumped out, immediately moving to help with the tent. "Not a chance, though Emily here needed some convincing." I forced another smile, grabbing my backpack and duffel from the trunk. The campsite was pretty enough, a small clearing surrounded by tall oaks and maples, their leaves a riot of red and gold. A fire pit sat in the center. Already stacked with wood, Tyler must have gathered. "This is the Tabor Tract," Nicole explained, consulting her phone. "It's one of the more remote areas of the forest, but I figured that would mean fewer people." "Great," I muttered, though no one seemed to hear me. As I helped set up our tent, I kept glancing at the tree line. Something about the density of the forest, the way the late afternoon shadows stretched between the trunks, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Did you guys know there's an old legend about this part of the forest?" Tyler said as we finished securing the last tent stake. Nicole groaned. "Please tell me you're not starting with ghost stories already. It's not even dark." Tyler grinned. "Just setting the mood. Supposedly, there was an old trapper who lived out here in the 1800s. Local Delaware tribes avoided this area because they believed it was cursed ground." "What happened to the trapper?" Rachel asked, already getting sucked in. "They found him in pieces," Tyler said, lowering his voice dramatically. "Scattered over a mile radius. Official reports said it was a bear attack, but supposedly the wounds weren't consistent with any animal. Some locals still claim to hear screaming in these woods at night." "That's enough," Nicole cut in, seeing my expression. "Let's not freak Emily out before we've even started the trip." I appreciated her intervention, but the damage was done. The knot in my stomach had tightened further. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire. Tyler had brought hot dogs and marshmallows, and Rachel broke out her flask of whiskey. The flames cast dancing shadows across our faces, and for a while, I managed to relax. The forest didn't seem so oppressive with firelight keeping the darkness at bay. "So," Nicole said after we'd eaten, "what's the plan for tomorrow? I thought we could hike to Cypress Branch. There's supposed to be some beautiful scenery along that trail." "Sounds good to me," Tyler agreed. "It's about 7 miles round trip, moderate difficulty. We could pack lunch and make a day of it." Rachel nodded enthusiastically. "I'm in. Emily?" I took a sip of whiskey, feeling it burn down my throat. "Sure," I said, trying to match their enthusiasm. "Why not?" The conversation drifted to work gossip and plans for the upcoming holidays. I participated when necessary, but found myself repeatedly drawn to staring at the darkness beyond our little circle of light. Several times, I thought I saw movement among the trees, a shadow shifting where no shadow should be. "You're still not convinced this was a good idea, are you?" Nicole asked quietly, sliding closer to me while Rachel and Tyler argued about the best way to roast a marshmallow. I shrugged. "Just not a big outdoors person." "There's more to it than that," she pressed. Nicole had always been perceptive. "You seem afraid." I hesitated, then decided a half-truth was better than nothing. "I got lost in the woods when I was a kid. Spent a night alone before they found me. Never really got over it, I guess." Nicole nodded sympathetically. "That explains a lot, but you're not alone now. We've got maps, GPS, phone service, nothing to worry about." I smiled weakly. "You're right, I'm being silly." But as I said it, the fire flickered and, for just a moment, seemed to burn with an unnatural bluish tinge. No one else appeared to notice, and I told myself it was just the whiskey playing tricks on my eyes. Later, as Rachel and I settled into our tent, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the darkness. I lay awake long after Rachel's breathing had evened into sleep, listening to the sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the occasional hoot of an owl, and something else. Something that sounded almost like whispering. I must have fallen asleep eventually because the next thing I knew, Rachel was shaking me awake. "Rise and shine, sleepyhead," she said cheerfully. "Tyler's already got coffee going." I blinked groggily, momentarily disoriented by the green walls of the tent. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back. "What time is it?" I asked, reaching for my phone. The screen was dead. "That's weird. I charged it fully before we left." Rachel shrugged. "Probably the cold. Mine's acting up too, but Nicole says it's just after 7. I dressed quickly and followed Rachel outside. The morning was crisp and clear, sunlight filtering through the canopy of leaves overhead. It was beautiful in a way I hadn't appreciated in the dim light of yesterday. Tyler handed me a steaming cup of cowboy coffee, grounds and all, and I accepted it gratefully. "Sleep well?" Nicole asked, studying my face. "Like a log," I lied. "Ready for that hike?" We ate a quick breakfast of granola bars and apples before setting off toward the Cypress Branch Trail. Nicole led the way, consulting her paper map occasionally. Tyler had tried to use his phone's GPS but found it kept glitching, showing us in completely different locations. "Technology," he muttered, shoving his phone back into his pocket. "Can't rely on it out here." The trail was narrow but well marked, winding through stands of oak, hickory, and the occasional cypress tree. In the daylight, the forest seemed less threatening, almost peaceful. Birds called from the branches overhead, and once a deer bounded across the path ahead of us, startling a laugh out of me. "See? Not so bad," Rachel said, nudging my shoulder. We hiked for about 2 hours, the trail gradually becoming less distinct. Several times, Nicole had to backtrack to ensure we were still on the right path. "That's strange," she said after the 3rd time this happened. "According to the map, we should be approaching Cypress Branch by now, but this doesn't look right." The trees had grown denser, the undergrowth thicker. The cheerful birdsong that had accompanied our morning hike had faded, leaving an unnatural silence in its wake. "Maybe we took a wrong turn," Tyler suggested, peering over Nicole's shoulder at the map. "I don't think so," she frowned. "But nothing looks familiar." She pulled out her phone. "No service. Great." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Should we turn back?" Rachel shook her head. "Let's press on a little further. If we don't hit the branch in the next 20 minutes, we can head back." We continued, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees pressing closer, the light dimming despite it being midday. And there was that silence, heavy, watchful. 15 minutes later, we emerged into a small clearing. In the center stood the charred remains of what might once have been a cabin. Only the stone foundation and chimney remained intact, blackened timbers scattered around like broken bones. "This isn't on the map," Nicole said quietly. Tyler approached the ruins cautiously. "Looks old. Maybe a ranger station that burned down years ago?" "No," I said, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. "It's older than that." Something drew me toward the chimney. As I approached, I noticed strange markings carved into the stone, symbols I didn't recognize but that made my skin crawl. "Guys," Rachel called from the other side of the clearing. "I found a trail over here. It looks more established than the one we were on." We decided to follow it, hoping it would lead us back to a main trail. The ruins made everyone uneasy, though no one would admit it out loud. The new path was indeed clearer, but something about it felt wrong. The trees on either side seemed to lean inward, their branches reaching like gnarled fingers. And the silence had deepened, if that was possible. "Does anyone else feel like we're being watched?" Tyler asked after we'd been walking for about 10 minutes. I'd been feeling it since we entered the forest, but hearing him say it out loud made my heart race. "Yes," I admitted quietly. Nicole stopped suddenly, causing me to bump into her back. "This is insane. We're going in circles." "What do you mean?" Rachel asked. "Look." Nicole pointed ahead. In the distance, through a gap in the trees, we could make out the stone chimney of the burned cabin. "That's impossible," Tyler said. "We've been walking away from it." "Well, apparently not," Nicole snapped, anxiety making her voice sharp. Rachel pulled out her flask and took a long swig before passing it around. "Okay, let's think logically. The sun is there." She pointed upward, where we could just make out the sun's position through the canopy. "So that's west. The campsite should be east and slightly north. Let's ignore the trails and just head in that direction." It seemed like a sound plan. We struck off through the underbrush, Rachel in the lead with her compact hiking compass. The going was rough. Thorny bushes tore at our clothes and fallen logs forced us to make detours, but we maintained our direction as best we could. Then Rachel's compass began to spin wildly. "What the hell?" she muttered, tapping the device. The needle continued to rotate, never settling on a direction. A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. "We need to get out of here. Now." No one argued. We picked up our pace, pushing through the undergrowth with growing desperation. The light was starting to fade, though it couldn't have been later than mid-afternoon. That's when we heard it, a low, whistling sound, almost like someone trying to call a dog. It came from behind us first, then seemed to circle around to our left. "Hello?" Tyler called out. "Is someone there?" "Don't," I hissed, grabbing his arm. "Just keep moving." The whistling continued, sometimes nearer, sometimes further away, but always keeping pace with us. And now there was another sound beneath it, a soft, rhythmic clicking. "What is that?" Nicole whispered, her face pale. No one answered. We were practically running now, crashing through the underbrush without any pretense of following a direction. The only goal was to put distance between ourselves and those sounds. Then Rachel screamed. I whipped around to see her staring at something just beyond the tree line. I followed her gaze but saw nothing. "There was a man," she said, her voice shaking. "Just standing there, watching us, but his face, God, his face wasn't right." "What do you mean?" Tyler demanded, scanning the trees. "It was wrong, like it didn't fit properly." She was trembling now, and I put my arm around her shoulders. "Let's keep moving," I said quietly. "Stay together." The light continued to fade, far too quickly for natural sunset. Within what felt like minutes, we were in near darkness, the trees just looming shadows around us. "We need to find shelter," Nicole said, practical even in her fear. "We can't wander around in the dark." As if in answer, we stumbled into another clearing. And there, impossibly, stood the burned cabin, its chimney a black silhouette against the darkening sky. "This can't be happening," Tyler muttered. "We've been walking for hours." A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness behind us. Then another. Something was approaching. "Inside," I said, pointing to the ruins. "It's better than nothing." The cabin's interior was mostly open to the sky, but one corner still had partial walls and a section of roof. We huddled there, backs pressed against the rough stone of the chimney. Tyler found a couple of pieces of unburned wood and managed to start a small fire using matches from his emergency kit. The flickering light revealed more of those strange symbols carved into the chimney stones around us. They seemed to writhe in the firelight, almost as though they were alive. "Does anyone recognize these markings?" Nicole asked, running her fingers over one of the symbols. I pulled her hand away. "Don't touch them." She gave me an odd look. "Why not?" "Because they're evil," I wanted to say, because they feel wrong. But I couldn't explain how I knew that, so I just shook my head. We sat in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. The fire provided minimal warmth and light, but it was comforting nonetheless. Outside, the forest was alive with sounds now. Rustling leaves, creaking branches, and occasionally that strange whistling and clicking. "We need to talk about what's happening," Tyler finally said, his voice low. "This isn't normal." "No kidding," Rachel muttered, taking another swig from her flask. "We're lost in a forest that won't let us leave, being stalked by something we can't see." "Not just lost," Nicole added. "It's like the forest itself is changing around us. The trails, the directions." "What about your story?" I asked, looking at Tyler. "The trapper who was killed out here. Did it say anything else? Like what happened to the people who found him?" Tyler hesitated. "The legend says that whatever killed him infected the land somehow, that it's still here, waiting for more people to wander into its territory." Rachel shuddered. "Great. So we're not just lost, we're in a horror movie." "It doesn't matter if it's supernatural or not," Nicole cut in. "What matters is getting out of here. The forest can't go on forever. If we keep walking in one direction long enough, we'll hit a road or a town eventually. Unless we keep circling back to this cabin," I pointed out. "Then we'll mark our path," she countered. "Leave signs so we know if we're repeating ground." It was a good plan, but something told me it wouldn't be that simple. Whatever force was at work here, whether it was our own disoriented minds or something more sinister, I doubted it would be outwitted so easily. The fire popped and hissed, sending sparks floating upward into the night sky visible through the broken roof. One of the embers seemed to hang in the air longer than natural, drifting lazily before extinguishing. Then another did the same, and another. "That's odd," Tyler murmured, watching the phenomenon. The fire suddenly flared, burning with that same unnatural blue tinge I'd noticed the night before, and in that ghostly light, I saw something move outside the broken walls of the cabin. A tall, thin silhouette passing by one of the gaps. "There's someone out there," I whispered. Everyone tensed. Tyler reached for a piece of wood, gripping it like a club. "Hello," he called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Who's there?" The whistling started again, closer this time. Then the clicking. And then a voice, low and distorted like someone speaking through water. "Visitors," it said, the word stretching out unnaturally. "It's been so long since we had visitors." Rachel gripped my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Who are you?" she called out, trying to sound brave but failing. A figure appeared in the doorway, or what was left of it. In the blue firelight I could make out the shape of a man, tall and gaunt. But as he stepped closer, I saw what Rachel had meant about his face being wrong. It sat on his skull like an ill-fitting mask, the features slightly askew, the skin stretched too tight in some places and sagging in others. "You can call me Mr. Blackbird," the figure said, his mouth moving out of sync with the words. "This was my home once, before the fire." None of us moved. None of us seemed capable of it. Mr. Blackbird tilted his head at an impossible angle, studying us. "You shouldn't be here after dark. Bad things happen in these woods at night." "We're lost," Nicole said, her voice surprisingly steady. "We're just trying to get back to our campsite." The figure made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Lost? No. Found. You've been found." He took another step forward, and in the shifting light, his form seemed to ripple and change, becoming less human with each movement. Tyler raised his makeshift club. "Stay back." Mr. Blackbird stopped, his head tilting even further to the side until it was almost perpendicular to his shoulders. "I'm not going to hurt you. Not me, you. But they might." "They?" I asked, dreading the answer. He gesticulated toward the forest with a too long arm. "The others. The hungry ones. They smell your fear." His gaze, if you could call those empty sockets a gaze, seemed to fix on me. "Especially yours. You've been afraid since you arrived. They like that." My blood ran cold. Somehow, this thing knew about the dread I'd been carrying since we entered the forest. "What do you want?" Rachel demanded, her voice shaking. Mr. Blackbird's face split in what might have been intended as a smile. "Company. It gets lonely out here." "We're not staying," Nicole said firmly. "We're leaving at first light." The figure's head snapped back to a normal position with a sickening crack. "Of course, but dawn is hours away, and the hungry ones are already circling." As if to emphasize his point, a chorus of those eerie whistles rose from the surrounding forest closer than before. The clicking sounds increased in tempo. "You should stay here," Mr. Blackbird said. "The symbols protect this place. Mostly." He gestured to the carvings on the chimney stones. "They can't come in unless invited." "And what about you?" Tyler asked, still gripping his club. "Can we trust you?" The figure's laugh was like dry leaves scraping stone. "Trust? No, but I'm not your enemy tonight." He moved toward the doorway again. "I'll return at dawn. Try to stay alive until then." And with that, he stepped outside and seemed to dissolve into the darkness. We sat in stunned silence for several minutes after his departure. The fire continued to burn blue, casting eerie shadows across our faces. "What the hell was that?" Tyler finally whispered. "I don't know," Nicole replied, "but I think we should do as he says and stay here until morning." Rachel nodded vigorously. "Agreed. I'm not going out there with whatever those things are." I stared at the symbols on the stones, feeling a strange familiarity. "These markings. I think they're protection sigils of some kind." "How do you know that?" Nicole asked. I shook my head. "I don't know, just a feeling." We settled in for a long night, taking turns to keep the fire going. The sounds from the forest continued, whistling, clicking, and occasionally, something that sounded disturbingly like laughter. Several times, we saw shapes moving just beyond the walls, circling our shelter but never entering. During my watch, while the others dozed fitfully, I studied the symbols more closely. They reminded me of something, a book I'd seen once as a child in my grandmother's attic. Strange markings she'd warned me never to copy or speak aloud. A memory surfaced, my grandmother telling me about our ancestors, women who understood the old ways, who could communicate with forces beyond the veil. "We have sight in our bloodline," she'd said, "the ability to see what others cannot, but it comes with a price." Is that why I had felt the wrongness of this place from the moment we arrived? Was I somehow sensitive to whatever malevolent force dwelled here? A soft, scrabbling sound drew my attention to one of the gaps in the wall. A hand, or something like a hand, with too many joints was feeling its way along the stone, long fingers probing as if searching for a weakness. I held my breath, watching in horror as the fingers stretched and contorted, bending backward at impossible angles. They found one of the symbols carved into the stone and recoiled as if burned. "That's right," I whispered. "You can't come in." The hand withdrew, but not before I caught a glimpse of the arm it was attached to, unnaturally thin and covered in what looked like bark rather than skin. Dawn seemed an eternity away, but eventually the darkness began to lift. The sounds from the forest gradually diminished, and the fire finally returned to its normal orange-yellow color. As promised, Mr. Blackbird returned with the first light of day. He looked more human in the pale morning light, though his movements still had that unsettling, disjointed quality. "You survived," he observed, sounding almost disappointed. "Most don't, their first night." "What are you?" Tyler demanded. Mr. Blackbird's face twitched in what might have been a smile. "A guardian. A prisoner. Depends on how you look at it." He gestured toward the forest. "The path is clear now. They sleep during the day." "Will you show us the way out?" Nicole asked. He tilted his head. "I can't leave this place, but the woman with the sight," he pointed at me, "she can find the way. The blood remembers." Everyone turned to look at me, confusion on their faces. "What is he talking about, Emily?" Rachel asked. Before I could respond, Mr. Blackbird continued. Your grandmother knew. She escaped, years ago. They've been waiting for someone of her line to return. A chill ran down my spine. My grandmother? How do you know about her? The forest remembers those who see its true nature. He reached into his tattered coat and pulled out a small object, a carved wooden pendant on a leather cord. She left this behind. He held it out to me. Despite every instinct screaming not to, I took it. The wood was warm to the touch, carved with one of the symbols from the chimney stones. This will guide you out, Mr. Blackbird said. But only you. The others must find their own way. We're not splitting up, I said firmly. He shrugged, an unnaturally fluid movement. Then you'll all remain. They'll be hungry again tonight. Nicole stepped forward. Emily, what is he talking about? What sight? I clutched the pendant, thoughts racing. The stories my grandmother had told me, the dreams I'd had as a child, dreams of forests and whispers and things that moved in shadows. The night I'd spent lost in the woods when I was 10, guided home by lights only I could see. My grandmother believed our family had a kind of sensitivity to supernatural things, I explained hesitantly. She used to perform rituals on solstices and full moons. My parents thought she was just eccentric. But you believed her, Rachel finished softly. I nodded. I've always felt things others don't, sensed when places were wrong. Like this forest, Tyler said. Yes, from the moment we arrived. Mr. Blackbird made that dry leaf sound again. The site runs in bloodlines, skips generations sometimes, but it always returns. He pointed to the pendant in my hand. That will show you the true path, but only if you look with the right eyes. And what about them? I asked, nodding toward my friends. Tie yourselves together, he suggested, hand to hand. The connection might be enough if your sight is strong. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than waiting for nightfall again. We used a length of paracord from Tyler's pack to bind our wrists together in a human chain. Me in front, then Rachel, Nicole, and Tyler bringing up the rear. Before we left, I turned to Mr. Blackbird one last time. Why are you helping us? His misaligned features twisted into what might have been remorse. I was like you once, a visitor who never left. Now I'm part of it. He gestured vaguely at himself and then the forest. Some bindings can be broken with the right sacrifice. What sacrifice? I asked, but he just shook his head. Go now, before they wake. We stepped out of the ruined cabin and into the forest. With the pendant clutched in my free hand, I tried to open myself to whatever sight I supposedly possessed. At first, nothing happened. The forest looked exactly the same, dense, disorienting, with no clear path in any direction. Then I felt the pendant grow warmer, and when I looked down, it was glowing faintly. I turned slowly, and the glow intensified when I faced northeast. This way, I said, pulling gently on Rachel's hand. We moved carefully through the underbrush, maintaining our chain. The pendant guided me, growing warmer when we were on the right path and cooling when we strayed. Several times we passed landmarks that should have been impossible. The same distinctive twisted tree, a particular rock formation, suggesting that the forest was still playing tricks on us. But the pendant never faltered, and I began to trust it, and by extension, my own instincts. I could feel something awakening inside me, a sense I'd always had but never fully acknowledged, the ability to perceive what others couldn't. How much further? Tyler asked after we'd been walking for what felt like hours. His wrist was chafed where the cord bound it to Nicole's. I don't know, I admitted, but we're on the right path. Rachel squeezed my hand. We trust you. The forest was changing subtly as we progressed. The trees were less twisted, the atmosphere less oppressive. Bird calls returned and sunlight filtered more readily through the canopy. Then we heard it, a distant whistling, different from the sounds of the night creatures. This was higher pitched, almost playful. It's coming back, Nicole whispered, fear edging her voice, but I shook my head. No. Listen, it's different. I concentrated, trying to pinpoint the direction. It's ahead of us. We pressed on, and the whistling grew clearer. Then, through a gap in the trees, I spotted something that made my heart leap. A flash of bright blue. "Tyler," I called back, "isn't your tent blue?" His eyes widened. "Yes." We pushed forward with renewed energy. The forest seemed to fight us now, undergrowth becoming thicker, branches reaching out as if to hold us back. But the pendant burned hot in my palm, and I refused to be deterred. Finally, we broke through into a clearing, and there, impossibly, was our campsite, tents still standing, fire pit, cold but intact. "I don't understand," Nicole said, staring in disbelief. "How did we get back here?" A figure emerged from behind one of the tents, a forest ranger in a green uniform. He was the source of the whistling, and he looked startled to see us. "Folks, everything all right?" he called, approaching cautiously. "Been looking for you since yesterday afternoon. Your vehicles were here, but no sign of you." "Yesterday?" Tyler echoed. "We've been gone one night." The ranger frowned. "Sir, your campsite reservation was for 3 days ago. Today's checkout day." We exchanged shocked glances. 3 days? We'd lost 2 entire days somewhere in those woods. "We got lost," Rachel explained shakily. "Took a wrong turn on one of the trails." The ranger nodded sympathetically. "Happens sometimes in Blackbird. Trails can be confusing if you're not familiar with them." He studied our disheveled appearance, the cord still binding our wrists together. "Looks like you folks had quite an adventure. Need any medical attention?" We declined but accepted his offer to escort us back to the main road. As we packed up our belongings in stunned silence, I noticed something strange. Our tents and gear were covered in a fine layer of what looked like black ash, similar to what had coated the ruins of the cabin. And when I checked my phone, not only was it working again, but the date confirmed the ranger's statement. We had indeed been missing for 3 days. Before leaving, I walked to the edge of the campsite and looked back at the forest. For a moment, I thought I saw a gaunt figure standing among the trees, watching, waiting. I raised my hand, still clutching the wooden pendant, and the figure inclined its head before melting back into the shadows. "Emily, you coming?" Rachel called from beside our car. "Yeah," I said, turning away from the forest. "Let's go home." We never spoke about what happened in Blackbird State Forest, at least not to anyone else. Who would believe us? Even among ourselves, we referenced it obliquely, afraid that discussing it directly might somehow invoke it again. Nicole moved to California 3 months later, claiming she needed a change of scenery. Tyler quit his job and now works from home, rarely venturing outside. Rachel and I still meet for coffee, but we avoid any mention of camping or hiking. As for me, I've been researching my family history, particularly my grandmother's side. I found old journals in my parents' attic, written in a language I don't recognize but somehow understand. They speak of forests and guardians and sacrifices, of women with the site and the responsibilities it entails. The pendant hangs around my neck now, hidden beneath my clothes. Sometimes at night I feel it grow warm, as if activated by proximity to something unseen. And in my dreams, I hear Mr. Blackbird's voice repeating the same words. Some bindings can be broken with the right sacrifice. I wake from these dreams knowing that our escape came at a cost, one I'm only beginning to understand. Whatever entity rules Blackbird Forest allowed us to leave, but it kept something in exchange. A part of each of us remains there, feeding the hunger of the things that whistle and click in the darkness, and someday it will call us back to collect the rest.